We shall call to order the Planning Commission meeting for Thursday, January 25th. And do we have Commissioner Cyrus on Zoom? Perfect.
You do.
All righty. Would anyone approve of the minutes from January 11th? Or would they make a motion?
I'll move approval of the minutes for January 11, 2024.
I'll second it.
All righty. Are we unanimous in this? Or does anyone have discussion? All in favor, say aye.
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 Aye. Can we hear Commissioner Cyrus?
And Commissioner Cyrus?
Aye.
All righty. All righty. Next item is public comment. Do we have anyone online today? All righty. And before we move to the action items, I would like to address one or two things. And I would start first with Mr. Gutowski. Do you have any input today?
Thank you, Madam Chair. For the record, Peter Gutowski, Community Development Director. I do have an update on Patrick Trowbridge. On Monday, January 15th, he offered his resignation in writing, citing his other demands associated with his responsibilities for the Bend Downtown Business Association, and he's also a business owner in La Pine, and just acknowledged that those demands were kind of trumping the ability to be on the Planning Commission. So in light of that resignation announcement, I coordinated with the Board of County Commissioners and Human Resources. And so Patrick Trowbridge was an at-large member of the Planning Commission. The term began on, like Commissioner Kelly, the term began on July 1st. It's a 4-year term. So a recruitment for an at-large position, with the one caveat that the position is catering to those that might be interested that do not live inside any of our cities. So it's targeting rural residents throughout the county in the unincorporated area. That position was posted, I want to say the 17th of January approximately, and it's open until February 9th and at 4 p.m. So for those that are interested, there's the Human Resources has a website that allows people to peruse opportunities, volunteer opportunities with Deschutes County. Our website has been updated. I got roped in to be interviewed by our social media coordinator, Eric Brion. So there's a video of me providing context of what the Planning Commission does, the membership. And spread the word. And as Vice Chair Curis knows, and the same is true for Commissioner Hovkamp, I anticipate the board, if the passes any indication, will want to have an active role in interviewing the short list of, as they determine the short list of candidates. And in the past, the chair, the vice chair, and myself have been paired with a county commissioner to go through that interview process. But more to come. That process, I would imagine, all things being equal, interviews would be in March and a decision would be made, a week or two late, early March. And so presumably a new member of the Planning Commission could be brought on board maybe the last meeting in March. So I'll keep you posted, but for now, the recruitment is live and we look forward to reviewing as many candidates as, express interest.
Madam Chair, can I offer a quick comment?
Yes, absolutely.
In that regard, thank you. I'm really pleased that I hope that the Planning Commission will have, some involvement, like, as you described, Peter. The one thing I know that there's certainly a lot of higher order qualifications for the position, but I always feel, if you'll pardon the unsolicited remark, but that a sort of a baseline qualification is that a person has the time to come to the meetings, do the homework, come to the meetings, and I'm guilty of this too. I think sometimes we overcommit. And again, I'm sure there will be questions that get at much higher order qualifications, but hopefully somewhere, colleagues, it works into the process that we can ask, are you sure you got the time and can you be there? Anyway, thank you for that. I'm sorry.
Thank you. And before we start with Tanya and the RV as rentals, Will and I were talking earlier this week. I am learning the Roberts rules, but in accordance with Roberts rules, when you have smaller committees versus assemblies and certain commissions, we do have the opportunity, one, to discuss the item at hand prior to a motion being made. And we have done this in the Planning Commission in the past. I feel it could clean up and tidy our motions without friendlies, without withdrawals. And if everyone is amenable to that, I would like to do that. If anyone has a concern about that, if you would raise your hand, and Commissioner Cyrus, if you would also do your phone hand.
And also, we can't see Commissioner Cyrus on our screens.
So if,
Can I make a comment? I'm not concerned.
Yeah.
Just so you know.
Yeah.
I just really want to say thank you for taking that leadership and just really respect your decision on that. And know from my own experience, it's not always easy to figure out, but
Yeah.
I really appreciate that. So
thank you. And I do know that there will be times when we need to make a motion before discussion. But with that said, as you noticed with my approval of the minutes, I asked if we were all in favor. I think that's another way to speed things up without going commissioner, we will save some time down the road on that. So if everyone's cool with that, that is a format I would like to accept. Thank you. All righty, so our first action item is deliberations RVs as rental dwellings text amendments.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
can I ask for exactly a reminder as to where we are in the deliberations process?
yes, actually, Tanya Saltzman will be going over that.
Try that.
Thank you.
Very welcome. Excuse me, for the record, can you hear me okay?
Mhm.
It's hard to know. For the record, Tanya Saltzman, Senior Planner. I'm here tonight to guide the planning deliberation continuations. The memos that I provided in the packet provides a summary of all the activities thus far. So I'm not doing a slideshow or anything like that. I'm going to kind of go through the memo, and that should provide the background of kind of where the Planning Commission landed, and kind of it was paused in the middle, and you can proceed from there. So deliberations began at the last meeting on January 11th. And at that time, after discussion, the first question, which was kind of the biggie, was, does the Planning Commission recommend to the Board of County Commissioners that RVs as rental dwellings should be allowed in rural residential exception areas pursuant to Senate Bill 1013 and subject to additional standards? There was extensive discussion. I thought it was really detailed and helpful to staff. The Planning Commission voted 4-3 to not recommend adoption of those proposed amendments. And staff is going to relay that to the board, as well as the dissenting opinions. So I'm going to just go over some of the points that were made, and please feel free, because this is what I'm going to relay to the board ultimately. So if I miss something or mischaracterize something, please let me know. So in terms of not supporting the amendments, some concerns were the amendments apply to a very large number of rural residential lots, anywhere between 12,500 to 13,000 if it was 1 acre minimum, with an additional 5,000 lots if it was reduced to a minimum acreage of about a half acre. That's just the scale. People were concerned about that. These amendments would generate unprecedented land use impacts that haven't been fully vetted at a community-wide level. So for instance, traffic, road maintenance, wildlife, rural fire protection, trash pickup. Those are some of the larger topics. Code enforcement, that was a huge topic, both in the public comments as well as the Planning Commission concerns. It's been noted that CDD currently has a backlog of code enforcement cases. They generally prioritize kind of immediate health and safety concerns. So there was concern that none of this or little of this might be able to be enforced. RVs are an incompatible land use with adjoining residences. So how's this land when there's a lot of outdoor living potentially as part of these RVs as rental dwellings? How does this work with the neighbors, whether that's visually, in terms of sound, sight, all of that compatibility. The amendments create unfunded responsibilities on the rural fire protection districts. The RVs, there was discussion about the taxing implications. So the RVs are not recognized as real property. So it wouldn't generally incur an increase in property tax. There might be a tiny bump based on the improvements that someone might do to the site, but not anything significant that people believe would help offset that impact. There's concerns for fire, wildfire, and, these were voiced by the fire districts who responded to this. They had a lot of suggestions about fire protection and mitigation, but there isn't necessarily the funding to address that. And then just in general, the threat of wildfire because they're not fire hardened. So those were kind of the major topics, the major issues of concern in terms of not supporting the amendments. In terms of supporting the amendments, the arguments were that it's necessary to provide options for another type of housing. This is a different type of housing than currently exists in the majority of the county, and that the county does ultimately have a role in this larger scenario of affordability and housing availability. It might not solve the problem, but it could provide one avenue of help. They would potentially be a less expensive option than ADUs. ADUs, as we know, were recently adopted for rural properties, and they would incur some significant cost in preparing and building an ADU. So RVs potentially could be a lower cost option. And concerning rural character, one commissioner noted that this doesn't touch resource lands, so farm and forest. It is rural residential. So in terms of the resource lands, they remain untouched. And that was one view about concerns about rural character. Do those sound pretty on the mark? Did I miss anything? Is there anything you'd like to add nuance to, or?
If I can.
Yes.
Thanks, Tanya. I think that fairly sums up the bulk of it. From what I recall, going through the public record and just from my notes from our own deliberations up to this point. The only one I might add, it's sort of captured, but was a pretty common sentiment up here, I think, amongst some of us anyway, that this felt a little bit rushed on the heels of the state legislation that permits that consideration and not kind of fully formed yet, or some of the issues and so forth. Colleagues, if I'm mistaken there, but that seemed to be a sort of a common sentiment.
Agreed.
Thanks.
Noted. Yeah, I think I had that in my head, but not on the memo.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so with that, so that was the first recommendation. And at that point, the Planning Commission did decide to continue deliberating additional items that staff provided. And then that was paused midstream. So that's essentially the only vote that officially took place. So now you are here to deliberate on additional items as the Planning Commission sees fit. In my memo, I've listed a few items that I had provided in the original deliberations memo. So these are just carryover from last week or 2 weeks ago. In addition, Commissioner Altman provided me with additional items for deliberation. So those are also included in the memo verbatim. It is up to the Planning Commission how you want to address those. If you want to talk about each one of them in sequence, none of them, all of them, it's up to your discretion. So I'm open to doing it however you see fit. We can go through the staff ones first, or you can pick and choose. It's up to the chair.
I would ask one question to the commission at this point. We have directed a no vote to the Board of Commissioners. Is there a consensus that we do want to touch on any or all of these item points as a backup recommendation in the event the commissioners decide to move forward? Or do we have a majority that just want to present a no vote? And I'm going to ask the commissioners. Commissioner Hofkamp,
Agnostic.
alrighty,
What I'll defer to them.
absolutely. Commissioner Altman, would you like to discuss or forward with no? Alrighty. Commissioner Karis, Vice Chair Karis.
I also, I don't remember if we had a formal motion. It's kind of like, if we already voted to discuss it, I think it would be complicated to not discuss it, but we'll see whatever.
And I don't recollect a specific motion to, but does Will or Peter remember? Or Tanya? If we did a formal motion to,
Conversation began, because there was just the discussion of acreage. I'm not sure.
Mhm.
It may be a moot point if,
Okay,
if
how about Commissioner Kelly?
Discussing, that's why we're here.
Already. And Commissioner Cyrus?
Yeah, I think it's important that we at least address these, and should the Board of Commissioners decide to move forward with them, I think it would be helpful to have our recommendations in place.
Excellent. Alrighty, so what I would like to do is just kind of go one item at a time. I would like to informally discuss each item before we make a complete decision. And the first item is, should there be a minimum acreage requirement for RVs as rental dwellings? Options are 1 acre, half acre, other minimum, no minimum. And the state bill does not propose a minimum acreage. Do we have any thoughts on this?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I think to summarize our discussion on it before, some people felt like there should be slightly lower minimum, like a 0.9. There was some discussion on whether or not we should just go with the variance that's built into the process as it is. One of the people that provided testimony mentioned that would be an additional burden on the property owner to have to go through the variance process. So they were hoping we would change it outright. And then Commissioner Trowbridge had raised the issue of sewered lots as an exception. So I think those are the main issues that we've discussed so far.
And Will, I believe you indicated that our county code already has a built-in 10% variance. So 1 acre would have a variance downwards to 0.9 acres. Is that correct?
That's correct. So in Will Groves, your planning manager, in DCC 18132, there's a provision that allows area standards and measurements. So, a 10-foot setback, a 1 acre minimum. It allows those to be subject to a variance procedure, and that's available to any standard that is specific to county ordinances. We can't use those to vary state standards, but in this case, this is a local provision. And there's an application, a fee required associated with that. And there has to be a finding made that that variance will result in more efficient use of the site, preservation of natural features where appropriate, adequate provision of light and privacy to adjoining properties, which I think is the key one here, and also preservation of topographic, vegetative, and drainage features that would be adversely affected by applications of the standard. So there's a basic safety check to make sure under that variance provision that there's not something obviously adverse in allowing that reduction from what would be if under a 1 acre standard to a 0.9 acre standard.
So the 10% is not just automatically built in, it needs to be applied for and a fee paid.
Correct.
Do we feel there are a lot of lots between 0.9 and 0.5 acres? 0.9 and 0.95, I mean, if I didn't say 95.
That's a good question. We have the data for what was between half and 1. Whether that includes 1, I can't tell you. That was about 5,000 lots, but we didn't hone in on 0.99. It was just up to 1 acre.
May I?
Yes.
When I was doing some research, I was just playing around on Dial and specifically into Deschutes River Woods. And there are a lot of lots in that zone.
Mhm.
In Deschutes River Woods specifically is kind of where I was playing with the map feature and such. So I think there are in certain neighborhoods that spread.
Any comments? Yes.
Oh, thank you. I don't know. I mean, I voted with the majority that recommended we not go forward anyway, but thank you for the opportunity to comment on some of these. I guess I would anticipate that any number that would go forward, that there's always going to be a significant number of lots that are going to be kind of under that number. So, if we were to choose 0.9 acres as a recommendation, even with an overall arching no, then there's going to be folks that are just under that, or maybe just under a 10% variance from that. So, I don't know. I'm concerned at the at a 1 acre, we're looking at somewhere around 15,000, as I recall, if you combine those that currently have a primary structure and those that could have a primary structure, and then an RV. So I don't know, that's kind of where my thinking is, that variances are applied for, I assume, daily in regards to various code provisions. So a burden maybe, but maybe not an undue burden. It would be there regardless of whatever number that we would go forward with. It's kind of my thought, respectfully, colleagues. Thank you.
And if I may, I have a concern with the half acre, like Oregon Water Wonderland 2, even though it is a Seward community. It is already a very densely populated community, and my concern is if we're putting RVs as residential units, there's already quite a bit of traffic volume, speeding in these neighborhoods. This is the area that I represent. A lot of comments in next door about how just packed it is. And I just think a half acre would be too little, even though it is Seward. So my personal opinion would be 1 acre.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I think that the staff have given us these as sort of multiple choice options, one of which is other minimum. So just to throw it out there, a 0.9 or 0.97 acre minimum would be quite a bit different than a 0.5 acre minimum as an option to consider. And then I also have a question, which is, are you thinking about having a separate process for the discussion about exception for Seward lots, or do you want us to include that in this discussion about this item?
I think that would be a separate item, though I myself would still not vote for a Seward half acre.
So the question is, are we discussing the Seward issue now, or are we discussing it after we decide on this one? Either way, it's totally fine with me. I just want to make sure that my comments are sticking to what we're discussing.
I would say after. Commissioner, Will?
If I may, the question about Deschutes River Woods, the other thing that's complicated is our lot area definition. Our lot area definition for lots under 2.5 acres causes certain areas to be subtracted from the lot area, including areas that are effectively under the road or in the road right of way, or any easements that are in there. So it may be best, if in fact this is really the concern is that, we'd like 1 acre, but we'd like Deschutes River Woods to be eligible for this because, there's a tremendous opportunity near a UGB to provide this type of housing, even though the generals know. I think you could you could come forward with a recommendation, which would be, for example, 1 acre with, asking, if the board does entertain the 1 acre size, to explore how Deschutes River Woods might be included in that, because I think that the 0.97 might not be the magic number. It might be 0.96, for example. So, and staff hasn't done that research.
So if I can rephrase what you're saying, the way that Deschutes River Woods is lotted is that some of them have a decent portion of their lot square footage within a right of way, and they may not be eligible as a 1 acre because of that.
Yes, that it's complicated to find out what exactly their acreage is and would depend per property. You know, the first Deschutes River Woods property opened up is 0.84 acres. So, you know, and that, I think that if the concern is that Deschutes, you'd like to see something like Deschutes River Woods come in, you could carry that recommendation forward to the board for staff to explore how to efficiently get that in without specifying a particular number.
All right. Commissioner Cyrus, any comments?
Yeah, a few of them. First of all, I prefer I think the 1 acre minimum at this point. You know, if we get into it 2 or 3 years and decide this is working great, it might be a time to reevaluate it. I don't think sewer should necessarily be a contributing factor to the discussion, because based on the fact that the sewer would have been designed based on the density available when it was installed, person certainly have to check with the engineering, but I would be willing to bet that the sewer was not designed to double the capacity of what it was originally designed for. Same with the water system, power grid, everything else that supplies it. So you've got some infrastructure issues that you're likely to run into if you just say, hey, it's got sewer, so there's no issues. I think my personal opinion at this point would be to disregard the argument that Deschutes River Woods maybe can handle it simply because it has a sewer, because I would highly doubt that. You know, maybe the engineer that designed it could argue differently, but at this point, I think I'd lean toward a 1 acre.
Thank you. Alrighty, so at this point, do we want to make a motion per item or kind of have a consensus of A and yes and no and this and that just through all of the items and then make one motion?
Yes.
I think it might make sense to discuss all of these first
Mhm.
because some of them might tie back to each other. You know, if we were considering a 1/2 acre minimum or a 1 acre minimum, and if we're willing to consider, one of the questions that I put forward would be, should it be within a certain mileage of a UGB?
Mhm.
Those kind of all go together.
Yeah.
So I would be in favor of discussing all of them and then coming up with a motion.
The only thing I have to add to that is, if we're gonna do that, then I'd recommend that we have separate motions on each thing, just because you know, it's gonna be almost impossible to, you know, like come up. I mean, you could move like, hey, I think we should say yes on all these, and someone's gonna be like, well, okay, I'm gonna vote no for that because I don't like number 2. So it's gonna be hard to bundle all these together in one motion. So
So shall we just move through the items in general, have a general consensus and then come back and do a motion per?
The staff think would be most efficient. Is that okay to ask, Madam Chair?
Absolutely. Staff?
I think the reasons that Vice Chair Curis said that kind of one dissent could sink a whole larger motion with multiple components. I think that a separate set of motions would make sense. My opinion.
Well, I agree with what you just said, which is to get a consensus all on these, not necessarily say yes, you know, to 10 motions or whatever it is, but say we agree on this for this one, this for that one, this for that one, and then tidy it up into one motion because we would have a majority for each item.
So before we move on to item 2, I feel there is a general consensus approximately for 1 acre or maybe a slightly different size. And we're not, and again, this is, so we'll go back through it, but I think things are tying in. So we're kind of, I think, done. And whatever
may I ask a question?
motion, absolutely.
Just about so when you said we'll go back through it, does that mean we'll have an opportunity to vote on each of these items?
Yes.
Okay, I'm more comfortable
Yeah.
with that than us saying kind of like, well, I feel like there's generally a consensus.
Exactly. We've not made any decision, but now we're just kind of like, okay, we've gone through item 1. Let's move to the next item. And the
Madam
next
Chair.
item is, should wildfire protection standards be included in the proposed amendments? A is no. wildfire standards should be included. Bill 1013 does not contain fire protection standards. B, wildfire protection standards that are utilized for ADUs should apply to RVs where applicable, specifically adequate access standards for road and driveway, wildfire hazard mitigation, defensible space standards, customized where necessary for RVs. C, other recommendations from various fire protection districts, such as require a 5-foot non-combustible ground cover around RV. Access roads to the living site should have an all-weather surface, not just dirt. All exterior portions of the RV should be within 150 feet of the fire apparatus access lane. And then recommend that staff further refine specific recommendations from fire districts. Is there anyone who would like to say their thought on item 2? All righty, we shall skip that then.
Madam Chair.
Item 3, should RVs as rental dwellings be subject to special setbacks or other standards to dictate location on the property? A,
Sorry,
Yes.
I'm hearing Commissioner Cyrus.
oh, okay, sorry about that. Commissioner Cyrus, go ahead.
Yeah, I guess on that one, I would prefer to see the fire department recommendations rather than other. I'd opt for option C on that one.
All righty,
Madam Chair.
yes.
I feel the same way. I still, so are we saying what we would pick at this point? Or are we just?
Yeah, just kind of getting a general idea, because as Commissioner Altman said, if we kind of have an idea where we're at on one point, it may help us bring an idea on the next point, or they may conflict one another, and we want to think about that.
Okay, so I vote for number C.
Okay,
Madam Chair.
yes.
Just a brief remark. I'm not in disagreement with either Commissioner Cyrus or Vice Chair Kieras. But I wonder with some of the statewide wildfire mapping process maybe still not finalized completely. It was rebooted, but I'm not as knowledgeable or up to date as I should be there. But I would I'm wary of kind of engineering wildfire standards specifically for RVs. If there is going to be more overriding kind of considerations for either mapping wildfire risk in terms of high, moderate, or low, and then having to, after the fact, step back out of that or get into a messy situation with chapters that conflict with overriding state regulation. Anyway, I'm kind of wary, but I'm not in disagreement with Commissioner Cyrus or Vice Chair Kieras on C. But thank you for the opportunity to comment.
And Peter, would you have any input with respect to the wildfire mapping?
Yeah, I mean, a couple of observations. The wildfire mapping remains in flux. There'll be I think all likelihood this calendar year, the wildfire map will get adopted and acknowledged. But remember, the wildfire map applies to structures, residential structures. And then there's a defensible space component. RVs are not a structure.
Oh.
They're not regulated under the residential spectrum code. They're regulated by DMV. So they're not subject to fire hardening. Just to add to the complexity of it. Again, the wildfire maps will apply to residential structures. There's a bit of a nuance, but as it pertains to ADUs, but I'll set that aside just because that it complicates it even more. But one has to be in a wildland urban interface and in a high risk classification. That's what triggers the fire hardening and the defensible space. But in the rural environment, you could be outside a wildland urban interface and still be in a high risk classification. So there are some other nuances, but RVs are not regulated under the state building codes division.
Thank you for that, Peter, clarification. With that information, then a general inclination to maybe be consistent with ADUs. I don't know. I'm more interested in that now. but ADUs are structures and RVs aren't, but I don't know, maybe some consistency with the wildfire regulations around ADUs, but I don't want to get bogged down here. We're clipping through a great thing.
Alrighty, item 3, should RVs as rental dwellings be subject to special setbacks or other standards to dictate location on the property? A, no additional setbacks. Current draft requires all RVs to meet the same setback requirements of a manufactured dwelling or single-family home on the subject lot. B, setback of a certain distance. An example would be campgrounds. Developed areas of campgrounds must be set back 100 feet from property lines. Staff notes that there are important similarities between campgrounds and the proposed RV use, including indoor-outdoor living, and similar setbacks may be appropriate to buffer noise and visual impacts from the use. Another example would be like home occupations, outdoor storage is limited and where allowed has a minimum 20-foot setback and screening requirements. Or C, require the RV to be sited within a certain distance of the primary dwelling, for example, 100 feet. And do we have any input? Alrighty.
Please, I guess again, for the same reason I just mentioned above, that C would make sense to me. I think there's already in the draft language, a minimum setback of 10 feet. If I recall correctly,
It's between the RV and any other structure.
any other structure.
Yeah.
Okay. And then a maximum of the 100 feet, similar to how we defined it in regards to ADUs. Makes sense to me, but I'm certainly open there.
Anyone else? Yes.
I would be in favor of having it set back as indicated in B, which would be 100 feet from property lines.
I have a comment. So I was again playing around with the maps, and if we say 100 feet from property lines, it would rule out basically all of Deschutes River Woods. Not to keep bringing Deschutes River Woods into the topic, but most of those lots, let's call it an average, are 100 by like 400.
Mhm.
And so if we said the 100-foot setback, it would out, that none of those. So I was also very curious about that, because I was like, oh yeah, that's what a lot of public comment we got was the buffer. And so I was very curious about that. So I was just kind of playing around with what does that even look like on these lots? So I'm also know that would that would disallow a lot of those lots. Actually, almost all of them.
It would eliminate the majority of my neighborhood as well, even though we're anywhere between 1 and 10 acres, there'd only be a few that would be eligible.
Chair,
Yes.
I'm planning to support number A, letter A, because I think that we already have setbacks for people's houses, and I think that if we're saying an RV is a house, then it should just be subject to the same setbacks that other houses are.
And Tanya, it doesn't have to be, it has to be a minimum distance away from the primary dwelling. Is that correct?
Sorry.
Yeah, so it has, for fire safety, it has to be a minimum of 10 feet away.
So one item I would bring up, and I would agree with Vice Chair Kiris, is that if it has to be tied into the septic system, it has to be within a reasonable distance located near the house. You can't get that much fall. Yes, Will.
Without leaning on this option, I'm not advocating for it, but to place it out there, I think a dynamic way you could deal with this is to say that the RV has to be located closer to the existing dwelling than any other property line.
Yes.
Yeah. Madam Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Cyrus.
Yeah, I would just point out that an acre is essentially 40,000 square feet, or just over 40,000, which is 200 by 200.
43,560.
Right, but all I was getting at is roughly 200 by 200. So if we were looking at a 1 acre option, and the previous discussion was the fact that we might go to like 0.9 of an acre, you would pretty much rule out that minimum if you were to site all these at the very center of a 1 acre square lot.
My property is 150 by 600, so mine would be eliminated. So, Will, you said that locating closer to the existing dwelling than any other lot line. Is that correct? As an option?
I bring that up because it's dynamic to the site. And, it also has the effect of making the existing residents the most impacted by the use rather than shuffling the impacts up against a neighbor.
Okay. And I am going to continue. I think we're getting, yeah. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Who would, I will call it option D. Who would be in favor of Will's distancing closer to the existing dwelling than any lot line?
Not opposed to it, like to see what kind of emotion it look like. So I might be, yeah.
I'd be in favor of that. I visualize my property. My house is more or less in the center. I have a neighbor to the west of me. I think it would be really crummy of me to put the RV way over there next to the neighbor, with a regular residential setback. I mean, I know I could put a house there, and I just said that, yeah, if you can put a house there, whatever, but it just seems like a little bit obnoxious.
My concern is, what if there is no neighbor on that property line and that is the most desirable spot for the pad, and it's actually not impacting a neighbor because their house is somewhere on the other side of the lot? You would then be not allowed to put it in the probably most ideal. I don't know. I'm just trying to think of all the different options. I think I'm still into A.
And that was Commissioner Cyrus. Did you have any input?
Now, that said, I think I would agree with option A, simply because I think it's going to be a specific site by site discussion.
And I do really feel that the ability to tie into the septic is going to keep it closer to the primary dwelling. We can have a motion later on it though, and get some additional feedback. So some other items for consideration: should there be a maximum acreage for a property for RVs as rentals? Options would be 2, 3, 5, no, or maybe something different.
I would say no.
Can we ask for input from staff? Is that okay, Madam Chair?
Oh, absolutely.
On this point, I don't know, thoughts on advisability, inadvisability of having a maximum?
I mean, I would actually look to the commissioner who's, not to throw it back at you, but I would be curious to hear the reasoning.
Yeah.
You probably thought it through more than I.
So I was thinking of it again, as I mentioned earlier, which will be coming up on number 6, is looking at the distance from the UGB and how close these would be to town. If we're concerned about other things such as burdens on rural fire protection districts, additional traffic on the road, potential interference with wildlife, then the closer to town, I think the better this proposed housing solution is. And so if there's a maximum limit on acreage, because that would prevent it from being, I don't know how far the farthest out zone is that would serve this issue, but if it's 10 miles from town, but it's 3 acres, do we want to be increasing population 10 miles from town, or say like 2 miles from town is good? And most of the properties that would fit that category are 3 acres. I don't know what it is. I'm just throwing numbers out there.
Any thoughts?
Yeah,
Commissioner
Madam Chair,
Cyrus? Yes.
I would favor the no limit. My personal opinion is, I think this would be have the least impact on larger acreages. And for that reason, I'd rather not impose a limit on them.
Understood. Real quick question, Tanya. Because there's so much language in it. Are we writing it that they must tie into the existing septic system? They cannot do an additional septic system?
The way it's written, it's property owner has to provide essential services. So that includes septic, water, et cetera. So I suppose in theory, if there's capacity and if the site allows it, it could be a separate system.
So
Whether that's economically feasible,
Yeah.
but there's not a requirement in the statute that says has to be on the same system.
because then at that point, we go back to setbacks or not setbacks, but we go back to distance from primary dwelling, because if someone could put in another septic system, they could potentially site it, any number of places on their property. And really, that's only going to be viable on larger acreages, 10, 20 acre parcels is my guess. Any other
Madam Chair?
discussion on item 4?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
yeah. As someone who actually has installed a lot of septic systems and used to have a license as such, I would argue that, excuse me, that the majority of the existing septic systems would not accommodate an additional dwelling, even if it's an RV on that septic system. So I would guess that the majority of them would require their own system.
Thank you. And I know in the South County, septic systems are having to be upgraded to bottomless sand filters, ATT systems, and about 5-6 years ago, those were running about 25,000. All righty, item 5. Should there be a limit to the number of permits issued for the first 2 years? Example, 100, 250, 500, or no limit?
Madam Chair,
Yes,
can I ask staff a clarifying question about this item?
yes, absolutely.
Can you please remind me, I think you told us recently, staff, how many ADUs have been applied for in the rural residential since that was allowed?
I haven't checked in with my staff recently. I know that they've been very slow to come in. I would say, I think we're still at a handful.
Okay,
Yeah, single digits.
single digits. And that was, when was that enacted? When was that permitted?
December 1st.
As of December 1st. Yeah, so with that as background, just thinking about, I thought about this a little bit ahead of time, and I can see wanting to have a conservative cap there, maybe to see, so it doesn't explode. But on the other hand, caps have the psychological effect of creating false urgency. So, that would make me think, that it would be D here, not having a cap, but I don't know, I'm equivocating. I'm interested in what my colleagues think.
I'm in agreement. I was thinking about this too, and I think that'd be like, I'm worried about this like scarcity effect that people psychologically might
Right.
have. Like, oh, I gotta,
Right.
which might create not the intention. So I'm with you where I was like, oh, the cap, that sounds great. But then I thought about it more, and I was also leaning towards D. No.
Agreed.
All righty, item 6. And as it reads, should the allowed use be within a certain distance from the UGB? 1 mile, 2 mile, 5 mile, no mile. Is this, Commissioner Altman, is this meant to be, it must be within a certain distance of the UGB? Is that the way? That's what I'm interpreting from the mileage. I would maybe say it should be worded as must be within. And you have already stated it, but if you'd maybe again state your reasoning behind that.
Yeah, my reasoning behind that was I think that if potentially there's in the 5-digit number of properties that would potentially allow this. I mean, obviously, we're not going to have that many people who do it, but to organically narrow it down, if the purpose is to provide housing for people who have jobs, most of which I would imagine are within the UGB, then I don't know that it makes sense to have so much additional housing a distance away when it adds to what we were talking about in the last meeting, rural services, fire protection, sheriff, whatever, wildlife, fire, all of the resources, additional road usage. So I think keeping population growth closer to town is where something like this should start.
Any other comments? Yes, Commissioner?
I'm sorry to keep doing this, but I like to clarify things with staff if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So, staff, are there 4 UGBs in the county? Do I have that number right?
Yes.
So there's 4 UGBs. So this would be within, we would be talking about a certain distance from each or
Yeah.
from any. Okay. Yep. Thank you. Yeah, that's all. Thanks.
And does anyone have an opinion on this?
I have an opinion.
All righty.
I just, when we have a motion or whenever we vote, I just plan to vote no.
That's the opinion that I was asking for. Commissioner Cyrus, any thoughts?
Sorry, I had to get it unmuted. I kind of would lean toward not having a UGB requirement.
If I may,
Yes.
the only other thought is we did have a fair amount of public comment in the record. My recollection is concerns about the distance from services and infrastructure. So I'm still thinking about that, but yeah, there's something to think about there. This would help mitigate some of that, I suppose, collective expense, if you want to think of it that way, or risk at having more of them further away. Yeah. But I'm respectful of the different opinions there. I'll wait and see what a motion looks like. Yeah.
Yep. All righty. Item 7, should the wildlife area combining zone be excluded from the program? Yes or no? And Commissioner Altman?
Again, I think that I'm just looking at it from the perspective of limiting or minimizing the footprint into rural areas that maybe support wildlife habitat.
So you would be in favor of exempting the wildlife area overlay? And anyone else's input on this?
If I may.
Yes.
If there's a motion to that effect, I would probably support it.
All righty. And Commissioner Cyrus?
I would lean against that, primarily because there was a significant amount of testimony submitted and research and studies that showed that rural residences were actually not the problem with regard to the wildlife. And in fact, it was other issues were impacting the deer. So I would lean against that.
All right. And any input? Okay. Item 8, should the county issue SDCs or a high permit fee to offset the increased road usage and emergency services? Yes or no? And I'm going to ask a brief question for Tanya. At this point, there's what is the permit fee going to be for? Because it's personal property and they're at most putting a concrete slab on the ground.
Right. That's a good question. So we envisioned, and we're still figuring out the nuances of it, but in our original coordination, we were considering a 2-phase permit process. I think I touched on this very briefly before, but first it's the primary permit is for building out the pedestal on the site. So your gravel pad, your electric, your sewer, kind of all the hookups, your mini RV park essentially. So that would be one level of permit. And then the other would be some sort of permit for the RV itself. So making sure that those elements of compliance, like does it have a toilet, that type of thing. So those would be, one is kind of focused on the thing that can move in and out of the site, and one is focused on the site itself. I don't know if you have other thoughts.
No, I think that's, the permit fees really come down to, are we providing notice to neighbors? And this seems like something that at least the establishment of the pad would be something appropriate to provide notice to neighbors. And that usually pushes the fee, over $1,000, but under 2,000. And then of course there are, as Tanya mentioned, there are rules specific to the RV itself. There's certain attributes it has to, under the current configuration, it has to have a functional toilet, for example. So presumably somebody's checking that, and we've got some sort of fee relatively simple, relatively cheap to, hey, we looked at your RV and it had the facilities that were required. So it's right now, it's at least we're conceiving of as a two-part permit. I think the thing that's tricky is that, a high permit fee, we would then have to have some way, if the idea is to pay for road usage or emergency services, I don't know the financial mechanism there. It may be if that's the concern, and we heard that concern from emergency services as well as a number of commenters, is that, I think, and that, that it might be appropriate to ask the board to explore funding mechanisms, some sort of, I don't know if it's something like a license that's outside of the land use system that says that, for operating this, you'll pay a certain amount into a fee at a time, but that's a part of the county's functioning. I don't know very well, but I think if you want to carry forward that concern, we certainly could the Planning Commission was concerned about these service districts and the imposition on infrastructure, and that, that capturing of fees was an important capturing of that, those costs was important.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, that was one of the topics that I was pushing last time we were talking about this. And I would anticipate some form of, and maybe Will and the rest of staff have some ideas, but coming up with a renewable permit or an annual permit or something, so that, and if the RV goes away, the fee stops. But as long as it's there, maybe there's an annual renewable permit that generates fees in lieu of taxes, so it helps cover the emergency services that it's going to be impacting.
Agreed. Thank you.
That's exactly kind of my train of thought too, was if this whole process is to encourage kind of an affordable housing option, I think stacking that fee up front wouldn't be the goal, but deferring it to an annual fee kind of makes sense to me too. I know that like if you have a vacation rental in the city of Bend, you pay an annual license fee and you have to renew it every year. And, and that can also be a time when you checked, is it the same RV that was there last year? Does it need to, maybe it helps kind of with the communication. And again, I don't know how the back end of that works, but to me, an annual renewal seemed to make sense as well.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I'm open here. I respect Commissioner Cyrus's comments. I think they were good. And Commissioner Kelly as well. I do think it's a fairness issue that if indeed the the commission decides, notwithstanding our 4-3 recommendation to not allow these, but that they do want to allow them, thus we're having this discussion today. I think it is a fairness issue, because if there is an RV, it's either itself a vehicle or there's going to be a vehicle associated with it, depending upon whether it has a motor in it or not. So there will be impacts to the transportation system. There will be impacts that SDCs normally pay for. So some kind of mechanism, I don't know what it would look like. I'm not the expert here, but some kind of mechanism like Commissioner Kelly's talking about, Commissioner Cyrus, to as a basic element of fairness, to have some kind of cost recovery for that, I think is a good idea.
All right. Item 9, does the Planning Commission suggest that the Board of County Commissioners pause reviewing this issue until ADUs are fully implemented, or say for a period of 6 to 12 months? Yes or no?
I've been thinking about this, and I don't really think that. I was trying to imagine. I feel like these are two different items, ADUs and RVs, and I don't see why they need to be. I don't see a reason for the pause.
And Commissioner Altman, reasoning behind this?
Well, it was just something that was brought up. I think Peter actually brought it up during the last meeting when we were shaping this discussion tonight of what sort of things we would potentially consider, which is where this list came from. And it was just something that we had talked about. So I added it to the list for discussion. I'm ambivalent. I just thought it was, worth presenting.
All right. Commissioner Cyrus, any thought on this one?
I guess I would lean toward not supporting it, simply because I would agree with Commissioner Kelly that the two really aren't related, aren't connected, and I don't think you're going to see the same people looking to do both.
Okay, and do we have any other input on this last item?
May I just make a clarifying comment?
Yes.
And I think with Commissioner Cyrus's comment, you will only be able to do one or the other on your property. So you can't have both. Just to clarify, I think he probably recognizes that, but I just want to make that clear. So a property might be
Correct.
eligible for both,
Yeah.
but you have to choose.
Yep. All right, so if we're ready, let's go back to item 1. Do we have a motion on, should there be a minimum acreage requirement for RVs as rental dwellings?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I would like to make a motion, please. And again, I want to clarify that our overall recommendation is going forward
Mhm.
up with a 4-3 split. But our overall recommendation is that we not. Yeah.
That is correct.
Okay, so with that in mind, I'd like to move that if the governing body's inclination is rather to allow RVs as rental dwellings, that the planning commission in that event recommends that the minimum acreage requirement for RVs as rental dwellings be 1 acre minimum.
Do I have a second?
I second that.
All right, and as the maker of the motion, the thought behind your recommendation?
It seems like a reasonable number. I'm still kind of maybe undue concern with the total number that's out there that's possible at 15,000, but it's a pretty shocking number. I agree that there's not overnight going to be 15,000 RVs out on the landscape, but it's pretty darn permissive. My understanding with staff's help is, again, with the 10% variance, that would capture down to 9/10 of an acre. And I'm respectful to other colleagues' comments on different acreages and different rural developed areas. I'm open to listening to that, but it just seems like any number that we pick, there's going to be somebody that's just under it or just under 90% of that and outside of a variance range. And it's always going to be a little bit problematic in that regard. So that's enough said for me. Thank you.
And any other discussion? Commissioner Cyrus?
I vote aye.
All right, all in favor, say aye.
I
All right, I would also vote aye, so that would be a unanimous 6-0 that we make the recommended minimum lot size 1 acre. All right, item 2, should wildfire protection standards be included in the proposed amendments? A, no, B, that of ADUs, and then C, other recommendations from various fire protection districts.
Madam Chair. I move to adopt the recommendations made by various fire protection districts.
I'll second.
Second.
Oh, all righty, so we have 2 seconds. And as the maker of the motion,
Well, I'm not a fire protection expert, and I think that requires a lot of technical expertise and experience. And I just think that it makes sense to defer to the people that do this every single day and understand what's needed to handle the threat of fire.
any other discussion? All in favor, raise your hand, and Commissioner Cyrus, say aye.
Aye.
All righty, we have a unanimous 6-0 that the recommendation for fire standards or wildfire protection standards be that from various fire protection districts, with the bottom bullet being that recommend that staff further refine specific recommendations from fire districts.
Yeah, this will, when this goes to a board hearing, this will be a great opportunity. We will reach out to them to get more input so they can finesse specific recommendations. And
Excellent, thank you. All righty, item 3, should RVs as rental dwellings be subject to special setbacks or other standards to dictate location on the property? No setback of certain distance. require RV to be sited within a certain distance of the primary dwelling or located closer to the existing dwelling than any lot line. Do we have any motions?
I'll make a motion.
All right,
I'll move to do the last one you said, closer to the primary dwelling than the lot line.
do I have a second?
I'll second.
Okay, and as the maker of the motion, your input or feedback for that?
Well, to your point that you made, if it were to tie into septic, I think that being closer to the house would be necessary than to be farther from the house. And I also think we heard a lot of testimony from neighbors or potential neighbors who are worried about the impact to them personally. So I would just be in favor of, if the property owner wants to do this, then it should be close to their house.
All right, any further discussion?
Madam Chair.
Yes. Go ahead, Commissioner Cyrus.
Yeah, I would tend to disagree simply from the standpoint of, as Commissioner Kelly pointed out, that may not put the RV in the most opportune or appropriate location if you start imposing arbitrary requirements like that. I still favor option A.
All righty, and Commissioner Hofkamp?
Thank you. Two questions of staff. Since this was an idea that I first heard from you, Will, I'm going to assume that it's doable.
Since this is we brought this issue had come up a number of times in discussions with staff as a possible solution to this. And so, there's been no identified reason why this would be unworkable. And certainly, if it's plainly before the board as part of your discussion, we would see this fleshed out further. So if there's some fatal flaw or it produces some obviously unwelcome outcome that we're not thinking of at this moment, it'll be under significant scrutiny in any future process.
Okay. Okay, and then my other question, as sometimes happens, has just floated out of my mind. Sorry about that. Thank you for that, though.
Any further discussion?
I don't think this is proper etiquette, but I would also vote for A. Because we're not.
You bet. Oh, so we actually have a motion on the table. So, okay, so all in favor, raise your hand. And Commissioner Cyrus, I think you are a nay.
That will be when you ask for them.
Okay, and I had two eyes over here and all opposed. Raise your hand.
Aye.
Okay, so you are opposed. So we have two yays.
How do you vote, Chair?
And I know I'm last. I would vote aye. So be it that it's 3-3, the motion does not pass. Do we
Madam
have
Chair?
any other motions on this?
Madam Chair,
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I'll move that we recommend to the Board of County Commissioners that no additional setbacks be required.
Second.
Okay, do I have a second?
I second that.
All righty, and maker of the motion. Your thought on that?
Well, I wiffle waffled back several times, and I eventually landed back at this one, because I think that, just what I said earlier, that, if these are houses, the houses can be where houses can be. I don't know that it makes a difference. I think people should put the RV closer to their house so they can take advantage of their septic system. And if their septic system can handle it, I think it's simpler because there's, it's not like different sites are doing different things. It's just kind of more clear. So I like the other idea. Wouldn't be offended if the Board of County Commissioners decided to do that instead, but had to go one way. So that's why I picked this one.
May I comment?
Yes, absolutely.
Although I totally agree that the onus should be on the primary residence, to help maintain the RV, or but I do think that if there is need for another septic system, if there's just too many exterior circumstances that might require, maybe a larger distance from the primary residence that we just can't imagine right now. Or maybe the neighbor is just not on that fence line, and that's the best place for the septic. It's hard to find septic feasibility, and it's not like you could always put it next to the residence. So that's why I feel like that's too restrictive.
It's a good thought. Any other input?
Geez, if I can,
Mhm.
it's inconsistent with my last vote, but I think I'm probably going to support this because I think that my colleagues have made reasoned arguments. So, yeah.
Absolutely. All in favor, raise your hand.
Aye.
All righty, we have unanimous. I will vote aye as well. That was really good thought with respect to the septic feasibility. So thank you on that. So we have a unanimous that there shall be no additional setbacks. And we shall go to item 4. Should there be a maximum acreage for RVs as rentals? Would anyone make a motion on this?
So I feel like everyone's made a motion this evening except me. I'm going to give it a go. I make a motion that no, there should be no maximum acreage for RV rentals.
I second that.
All right, and do you want to discuss why? And at this point, is this something that so what is the intent of your motion? What's the thought behind it?
I think again, like I just can't, I have a hard time. There's going to be a lot of different properties that might be eligible for this. And I think restricting it eliminates some properties that might be great opportunities for this. And maybe they're 6 acres or maybe they're 50 acres. And I think that putting too much restriction on it defeats our purpose of allowing opportunities in proper places that meet all these other requirements.
Any other input from anyone? All right, all in favor, raise your hand.
Aye.
Okay, we got 3 here. All of those opposed, raise your hand. All righty, I am also going to vote aye, so we have 4 ayes, 2 noes on minimum acreage. There is no minimum acreage required. And next item, should there be a limit to the number of permits issued for the first 2 years? Does anyone make a motion on that? Or it's just a moot point if we make no motion. Would that be correct, Tanya?
You can choose to just not address.
Okay. All in favor of not addressing this issue?
I think if no one makes a motion, then we just don't,
Okay,
no change to it.
so Commissioner Cyrus, any input?
I'm fine with that. I mean, I would have supported a no limitations, but if we don't address it, we end up with an option D anyway.
Yep.
D means default. D for default.
All righty. Should the allowed use be within a certain distance from the UGB? 1, 2, 5, no. All righty, I'm going to write that one off. Should the wildlife area combining zone be excluded from the program? Yes or no? Do we have a motion?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I'd like to move that the wildlife area combining zone be excluded from the program.
Do I have a second?
I will second.
All righty. As the maker of the motion, your thought behind it?
Oh, the decision was made by the governing body to not expand, I think, the wildlife area combining zone, despite our recommendation to go forward with the ODF and W recommended expansions. Mule deer herding, we all know that 50%, I think, of ODF and W targeted population numbers declines by 10% a year, I think are the numbers I vaguely recall. So I think that I respect Commissioner Cyrus's comment that this, I think, takes out a significant number. I forget how many it is of the eligible lots. I'm aware of that impact. But I think it's important enough that I'm proposing this motion.
Alrighty. Any other input, Commissioner Cyrus?
Yeah, I'd love to address that. And I would remind everyone that we had a significant amount of input as well as studies, even opposition from the Hunters Association to our proposal to put expand the mule deer, because quite simply the data does not support the claims. Even ODF's own ODFW, excuse me, their own data doesn't support their position in the fact that majority of the losses of deer are predation, followed by poaching, followed by legal hunting, followed by car strikes. And in fact, via their own data, the claim is only 3% of the impact could potentially be linked to rural living. And in fact, the study from the UCLA indicated that the deer sought protection from rural residential type activities from the predators. And in fact, residential homes actually helped the deer populations rather than hurt them. And so if our goal is to actually help the deer, we should actually be encouraging more rural development instead of prohibiting it. So I would certainly oppose this motion.
Thank you. All in favor, raise your.
Madam
oh,
Chair, may
sorry about that.
I
Yes, go ahead.
ask a clarifying question just for staff? So this motion is about the wildlife area combining zone. I'm just wondering, and maybe this is something that I should know without asking, but the maps in our packet, which it may look like I'm on Instagram or something, but I'm on our packet on my phone. Those maps, deer migration range and deer winter range and the elk range, are those all, when we say wildlife area combining zone, are those include all of those, correct?
Yes.
Okay, just making sure.
And if I can clarification, only those wildlife area combining zones that apply to eligible lands that could presumably under the legislation of Senate Bill 1013 be able to be cited in rural residential exception areas. We have other zones that are impacting exclusive farm use. Those are not listed.
Got
So
it.
these are exclusive. What Tanya's provided are exclusive to those lands that would be eligible under the legislation that was adopted by the legislature this year or last year in 2023.
Do we know the approximate number of lots?
Not think we do. I might have that back in the record, but I don't.
Seems like I saw that number somewhere. I think it was significant. It wasn't insignificant.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
my comment about this is that, looking at the deer migration range, there's, the first map on here, if people are following along. We've got the city of Lapine, and then we've got, looking up north on the map, Sun River. It just seems like there's a lot of development already there. And I know that's what we're talking about. But I'm torn because I just don't see how adding an RV with a person living in it, or two people living in it, or two people and a child living in it is gonna change that problem all that much. I'm struggling to get my head around that. It's sort of abstract, but I think I would feel pretty differently if this were less developed already. So those are my thoughts.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
If Totally reasonable thoughts. I agree with Vice Chair Karas on that, when you, especially when you look at the maps and you look at the present impact. I think it's important and that we recognize, because these kinds of discussions will come back around at one point or another. There is a difference between causes of deer mortality and then additive impacts to deer population numbers. As long as there have been deer, there have been predators on deer. And saying that predators take deer or parasites take deer is stating a basic biological fact. Deer have to die from something. But what was the point of discussion earlier, which we don't need to rehash now, and it relates here, is what are additive impacts to the population as a whole, not individual deer mortality. And I just totally respect what Vice Chair Karas is saying, but with the presentations that we had from ODF&W earlier, it's kind of like 1,000 cuts, and each little cut might not be that significant, or it might be a lot that's adjacent to a lot that's already developed and got a structure on it. But each little cut makes a difference. And I do agree there's something to what Commissioner Cyrus is saying about there's some, there's at least anecdotal evidence, I suppose, that there's some compatibility of deer with some patterns of development. I mean, anecdotally, we see them in our yards. I think everybody here has them. I have them they're sitting up in my yard right now. I know it. But what we're talking about is the quality of the habitat, most particularly the winter range, the ability of the deer to move around and migrate. The mobility of mule deer, town or country, is one of the fundamental aspects of their biology. In fact, there's a word for it, and it's called vigility. It just has to do with their ability to move around on the landscape in an unimpeded manner. And that's free of houses, free of lights, free of dogs, noise, fences, and every little bit of development impedes that. So I would just, I don't know, colleagues, I'd contribute that out there. I feel more strongly about this than some of the other ones, but respect difference of opinion.
Yes, Will.
On the number. So approximately 6,350 lots that fall within that would be potentially eligible, either vacant or currently developed, and would also be within a wildlife area combining zone.
And a question I was going to have, if we did exclude the wildlife area combining zone, would that basically eliminate the entire South County?
Not wholesale, but significant portions of it.
Yes.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. I support Commissioner Hovecamp's comments. My comments probably yes to all of that, but also for me, it's additional traffic and road usage. Driving here, we have a herd of deer. They come through our neighborhood too. I'm on EFU, but I think there were 2 moms and 3 yearlings that I passed almost in the dark on my way here tonight. And my area isn't hugely populated, but let's say we had 100 potential properties that took advantage of the RV usage. And so now we have 100 extra drivers on the road. That's 100. I mean, not everybody's going to have an accident, but I think you see where I'm going. It's just additional potential mortality events for deer, dangerous for drivers. I'm looking at it from a traffic perspective also.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
have a couple additional thoughts
Mhm.
to add to the record. Looks like Will has a comment.
Oh, I looked at the map. I want to retract my prior statement. I think it wholesale eliminates South County with the exclusion of Deschutes River Woods. There may be,
And that's not South County.
what's that? Right. There may be small areas that don't fall in there, but I can't see them at the level of the map scale that I'm looking at. So I
Yeah.
think that does in fact eliminate the entirety of South County.
So here's a couple extra thoughts. trying to think of what order to put these in. So we know that the Board of County Commissioners voted the way that they did for the wildlife inventory update. So that said, we also know that ADUs are allowed in the wildlife area combining zone. Also allowed in the wildlife area combining zone, I believe, please correct me, I'm looking to staff if I'm wrong about this, but you know, people can put an addition on their house. They can expand the square footage of their house. They can have roommates that they rent out that portion of their house to. And all those two options, building an ADU or putting an addition on your house, also add to traffic impacts and the impact of more people living in those areas. And those two things are already allowed. And so if RVs are much cheaper option for people than an addition to one's house or building an entire new ADU. And I just feel like since those things are allowed and going to be allowed, it just seems a little bit prejudicial against a much more affordable housing option if we say, well, it's all right if you want to spend a ton of money and add to your house, or spend a smaller or greater ton of money to build an ADU, but we're not going to let you do this really cheap thing that could actually help people live in a more affordable situation. So it's not, I think I'm probably going to end up voting no on this one, but it's not because I don't care about wildlife. It's more just like, given that these other uses are allowed, I just feel like it's unfair not to allow RVs there as well, because they're a lot less expensive.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Cyrus.
Yeah, I would just, I mean, don't want to beat a dead horse, but I would just like to point out that it's a lot more than anecdotal discussion about the fact that deer tend to migrate toward developed areas and away from predators. And in fact, there's a very extensive study done by UCLA that's in the record that actually supports the notion that deer actually look toward human habitation for protection. So, I mean, I guess I would disagree with the notion that it's simply anecdotal.
And I did read that study and I'm torn as well. I agree with Vice Chair Curis regarding ADUs being allowed, but not allowing RVs if it were to move forward. And then that brings me back to the South County, and I wish I would have voted a 5-acre minimum for RVs as a lot size. Yeah, in the South County, like we did for the ADUs. And actually that was something put forth, I think, that was a recommendation by the water department.
For the ADUs.
Yeah, that wasn't even thinking about it. And I'm really torn on this one. I would probably be inclined to vote no, solely for the fact if we're trying to get affordable housing, though I don't want them in the first place. So we do hope that the Board of County Commissioners goes with our recommendation. So we will vote. All in favor, raise your hand. All against, raise your hand.
Aye.
And Commissioner Cyrus?
Aye.
Vote no.
Yes.
Alrighty, I will also vote no at this point, and we will be 2 ayes, 4 nays on exempting the wildlife area combining zone. Okay, the next item, item 8, discusses should we have CDCs or a high permit fee, or then an alternate was suggested of an annual licensing fee after the first year.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I move to recommend to the Board of County Commissioners that we explore they explore funding mechanisms to support service and infrastructure.
Do I have a second?
Second.
All righty. So, explore funding mechanisms.
To support service and infrastructure, or services maybe is a better word.
All righty, as the maker of the motion, thought behind it.
I I've worded it this way because I think that it makes more sense to recommend that they explore funding mechanisms than us to recommend a specific funding mechanism, because that's a big part of their role, is to figure out how, what the budget is and how to pay for things. I know that staff can help research some excellent options for them. And so I think Commissioner Cyrus brought up really good points last discussion about funding, and I'm concerned about that too. So I think it's a good recommendation.
Any thought, any input from anyone else? All in favor, raise your hand.
Aye.
Alrighty, we have unanimous to explore funding mechanisms to support services.
And infrastructure.
Services and infrastructure. And the last one, does the planning commission suggest that the BO, Board of County Commissioners pause reviewing this issue until ADUs are fully implemented? Does anyone have we've already discussed it. Does anyone want to make a motion as to yay? All righty. We're through RVs as rental units.
Congratulations.
Yay. So Tanya, you've made notes as to our recommendations.
Summarize it back, or do you not want to?
Do we feel comfortable? Do we feel comfortable with the decisions we made, or would we like her to summarize?
I'm comfortable.
Chair's
but
call.
I,
Okay, I think we're good.
I wanted to mention on when you read back one of the motions, and it was should there be a minimum, you said minimum instead of maximum. And so I just want to make sure that it's clear.
Oh,
It does.
Okay.
yeah, my bad.
Okay.
All righty. So you will take to the Board of County Commissioners that we did recommend 4-3 against doing this at this time. I believe when we did make our recommendation last time that we would like to see another county go first before we address this issue again.
Yes, I will relay all of this basically, and the points that I gave in the beginning about the initial vote, and then just whatever nuance I can provide the reasoning behind these motions that you just made. So
Awesome.
thank you for making it very clear and very easy for staff to kind of.
Terrific. Thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Will.
Oh, and I'll just say that as we proceed with the board, we'll keep the planning commission apprised, obviously, of dates and
Thank you.
milestones.
Alrighty, and before Nicole gets a going, is everyone comfortable? Would anyone like a break right now, or are we good moving forward? Alrighty, we will take a 5-minute break.
All right.
Commissioner Cyrus, are you present?
I am.
Terrific. All righty. Let's go, Nicole.
All right. Good evening, Commissioners. For the record, Nicole Mardell, Senior Planner with Deschutes County. So thank you for all the work that you've been doing so far this evening. We're entering into our second deliberations meeting for the comprehensive plan, but really our first substantive meeting. And before we do that, I wanted to provide, again, kind of similar to last time, a couple of options for the Planning Commission to consider before you start your discussion this evening. So this is a little bit different, as I've mentioned before, than your typical text amendment or some of the other items that you've worked on in the past, where it's more technical or kind of getting more into the details. This is a comprehensive plan, so it is broader goal and policy language, and then of course the narrative in the chapters. So what you have before you today is the draft 2040 plan, and unlike other processes where we as staff draft something, bring it to you for you to review and add your kind of signature edits to. This is a little different because you've been so integral in that process. So far, I would say that this is, your signature comprehensive plan that you have before you today as a draft. And really where we are today is following the public hearing. Although the document itself had a variety of community input and engagement throughout the process, following the hearing, we're trying to establish what do we do with that information that we learned? Do we want to change any recommendations? Do we want to incorporate new information? Or do we feel like the information in the draft plan is adequate to address some of those concerns that were in the record because we heard them throughout the process? So that's kind of where we are. I made this graphic just to kind of show you two different routes that you could take here. On the left-hand side is maybe the route that is a little bit more I think, traditional for the Planning Commission, where you're getting into wordsmithing. It's much more of that detailed review. And, we'd pull up a screen, we could edit on the fly, and you'd be really putting pen to paper, and you'd be essentially rewriting some of the content of the comprehensive plan. We as staff wanted to share that we have some concerns with taking that approach, mostly due to timing. We thought it would be helpful to just share, some of the context for that recommendation. When we set out the scope and the timeline for this process, the board gave us approval to essentially complete this process by February of 2024. And because we had multiple public hearings and we wanted to give that opportunity for community input, that of course set us a little bit behind schedule. So that being said, because we do have, that tentative due date in the background, we are able to kind of extend it. But we may need to check in with the board if we aren't getting to their adoption process within, I'd say, a month or two. One of the concerns that we have with the wordsmithing approach is mostly the time that it takes to go through that level of detail and edits. So we wanted to note that if you did want to take this approach, which you definitely have that option, you'd probably have to spend 4 to 6 meetings to go into the level of content that commissioners raised of wanting to discuss so far. And those meetings would have to be longer. We do have some other items that need to come before the Planning Commission in April and May, including 2 applicant-initiated text amendments. So typically, we do have the ability to add extra meetings or kind of delay some of the process. We do have other items that require your attention and other long-range planning projects. And of course, this will be going to a secondary hearing process as well. So the board will, hear additional testimony there. There will likely be additional changes at that process. So wanted to keep that in mind. On the right-hand side of the chart is, I think, our recommendation to you for you to consider. And that's to, rather than having the red line edits or working through things pulled up on the screen, getting into it word by word, is to essentially have the discussion that you had this evening with RVs, which is looking at the policy approach and, which approach should the county take, and then having us as staff write out that language and incorporating it into the document that would then go to the board. So it would be, less providing specific word edits and more, again, just the general direction on that topic. If you were to take that approach, we'd estimate 3 to 4 meetings, which is what was outlined in your packet, being kind of the standard 3 to 4 hours each. So typically ending, at 8:30, 9 p.m. And then, of course, with that option as well, you would go to the board or we would go rather to the board for the secondary hearing process. I wanted to note, also while you consider these two approaches, I wanted to just remind the commission that the comprehensive plan is intended to focus on goals and policies, but not actions. We will have that implementation plan, which we're already starting to work on, but would come, essentially for, review by you or more detailed review by staff following adoption of the plan. And that's where you could have much more detailed, one-time actions or directives. I also wanted to note that in drafting the document that we have today, staff, the consultant, and I believe the commission really sought to find a middle ground to make sure that the plan really provided policies and goals that, recognized a variety of perspectives and balanced them. And I would say that quite a few of the comments in the record were seeking to push those policies in one direction or another. So while you consider these items as you enter into your deliberations, just wanted to, remind you that there doesn't have to be winners and losers in this document. The goal is to have policies that contain essentially something for everyone, because this is a countywide plan and we do have a wide variety of perspectives in this county and values. And then the last thing I wanted to mention before we kind of dig into how you'd like to approach this is just noting that if a policy, feels polarized, or it feels like you want to get into a level of detail where maybe we just don't have the ability to get into the depth in a policy, you could always defer to encouraging further community discourse. So I'll use the topic of water. There's so many different perspectives of water, and I think we're getting new information every day. So in place of, creating a policy that takes a specific stance, if you didn't feel comfortable taking a stance, you could say, convene a stakeholder committee or, coordinate with, other agencies. So if you ever feel like you don't want to have to make a choice and there isn't room for that middle ground approach, you could always defer to a policy that just supports, again, further community conversation about that topic.
Do you mind if Madam Chair, can I build off that comment?
Yes, and but real quickly, Nicole, you said convene a stakeholder committee, and then what did you say with respect to other agencies?
Coordinate with other
Coordinate. Peter?
Madam Chair, what I was going to offer, and Nicole's doing an outstanding job of trying to finesse and provide this kind of centrist collaborative spirit of the comprehensive plan, but I'll just use the mule deer inventory as an example. Take away the outcome. There were some that were disappointed in the board's decision. There were others that felt that was the right thing to do, but the process that the county executed, going back to the pandemic, when we got a grant, we had story maps, we convened remote public open houses, followed by with an independent consultant to facilitate the conversation about you're focusing on 3 inventories, coordinating with the Oregon Department of Fish and Wildlife, checking in with the board once that was finished to determine if the board wanted to have staff initiate a formal amendment, which they did at that time. I would offer that any polarizing topic, and there are a handful that all of you are aware of, Deschutes County and the Community Development Department, we're going to be doing that. That's what's expected. We need to have community conversations. We need to engage stakeholders that come from a diversity of backgrounds. We need to engage the subject matter experts. And so just to kind of put some more momentum into Nicole's comments about how staff is trying to give you these opportunities instead of honing in on the words and whether or not you want to, get into these kind of, some may think of as binary conversations. We're going to tilt it one way or another. We would just offer that, these topics are going to come up around resiliency, around climate change, around natural resources, around housing, around agricultural lands, around forest land productivity. And at the end of the day, if and when the community and the planning commission and the board want us to undertake those projects, we are going to have these kinds of processes. So that's why we're offering as a suggestion to, if you feel like we're getting into the minutia, this is an opportunity to just trust the process. None of us, and staff has no stake in it in terms of outcomes of specific work projects. But what we can control is a robust public process. And I think all things being equal, Will and his team are very, very good at it. So just some additional color commentary to what Nicole's offering as you get into some very substantive policy options. And of course, at the end of the day, if you want to get into wordsmithing, you have that right and that responsibility. But we wanted to offer this perspective as well, because that's what we do, and that's what we'll be doing tomorrow and the day after, when these projects present themselves. So thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you.
And I think one other item, that I forgot to mention on this slide as well is, with that right-hand side path, I think it's also prioritizing review of items that really you feel you wouldn't be comfortable moving this document forward without addressing them. So, I think the Planning Commission, your recommendation to the board is doing a couple things, but I think it's highlighting those really key issues that warrant discussion by the board and further review. And then I think it also is, again, a chance to say, hey, the public comments that we received, I changed my mind, or there's a new topic that we didn't think about. But we ask that you really stick to those items that you can't live without, just so that we, again, can kind of elevate those to the board. And where possible, if you feel, agnostic or it's, it's going in the right direction for policies, that, you could provide that general direction to us, and then we could do the edits before, sending that document to the board. And I also just wanted to invite Matt Hasty. We have our consultant here this evening to help facilitate this conversation. And just with his experience working on a variety of these comprehensive plans, I think we wanted to invite him to just share how other jurisdictions have approached deliberations. So Matt, I'll turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Nicole. I don't have a ton to add, but I would say, one, not super surprising to get to a point where we've gone through what I would consider to be a pretty robust engagement process, and B, a lot of discussions with you all as the advisory body for this process, and then still end up with a fair number of comments, as part of or after the public hearing process, because again, I've never worked on a project where everybody was happy with everything. But what I tend to sort of look at is, did we go through a process that we can stand behind? Did we hear from the community? Did we have good conversation with the advisory group, which in this case is you all? And at this point, is there something that's, like Nicole said, has changed your minds, that you think, oh gosh, I really can't live with this outcome? Or do we say, hey, we support the process we've been through on most of these items, and maybe there's a few things we really need to talk about. So that's been sort of my experience with working with other communities. They tend to kind of go that route. They kind of trust the process. If they feel good about the process, they tend not to revisit too many things when they get to this point in a process. So that's just kind of what I've seen in the other places I've worked over the last however many years I've been doing this. So thanks for the opportunity to give you my thoughts, and I'm happy to kind of help with the discussion moving forward tonight and at subsequent meetings.
Perfect. Thanks, Matt. So with that, we wanted to open it up to the group to, get your thoughts on which approach you would like to take, how you'd like to approach deliberations. So, just some things to think about is, curious about that general approach. Do you feel comfortable providing that discussion and direction to staff, or do you feel like, hey, yeah, I do want to get into the weeds and redline and on the fly, change some of the verbiage for goals and policies and narrative. Another item we want your consensus on is meeting end times. So again, depending on the approach, we might have some late meetings just due to scheduling. So just want to make sure that that expectation is clear and agreed upon. And the third is, if there's a topic that you're working through and you feel like it's been vetted, you feel like you're ready to move on, how would the commission do that? So, we wanted to offer, a potential avenue, which would be, as we bring you a matrix, before jumping into that topic, you could say, the chair could offer, would commissioners like to revisit this topic? And if for some reason, the commissioners say, nope, I feel like we're good, then you could vote to move past that topic, or, revisit it, of course. And again, it could apply to if you feel like a topic has been adequately discussed and maybe, again, you're just not finding agreement as a commission, that could be an avenue again to kind of move on, and keep the language as drafted. So just some things to think about, and I'll turn it back over to you.
So just for tonight's meeting, Vice Chair Curis does have to leave no later than 9 o'clock. She has an early flight tomorrow morning. We can continue going after 9. I would not be inclined too much later. Living south, I know the roads will be getting slick again. So that's my personal thought. And with respect to this matrix, minus Commissioner Kelly here, we've pretty much gone through all the chapters. We did a lot of wordsmithing in the beginning. So I am inclined to go with Nicole that if we're good with it, let's just go on. And this will be different than RVs because all of these are exclusive from one another. So I just want to go down the line, and if we think we need to discuss it, we will. Otherwise, we will just bypass it. Is everyone comfortable with that?
Madam Chair,
Yes.
can I add to those comments, which were excellent? First of all, I'd like to commend Senior Planner Mardell. I think it's smart to spend a few moments and talk about how we want to proceed here, because we can really easily dig ourselves into a really miserable process of wordsmithing and lots of meetings. You didn't put it in exactly those terms. You put it in a lot more careful terms. But really appreciate that. I think it's frankly courageous to suggest that we avoid making it miserable for everyone, because and I would blame myself first and foremost amongst that, making it miserable. So a brief comment, Peter, to your observation using wildlife inventory as an example. I think you're absolutely right. I think it was a very intense process, an extensive process, very thorough and so forth. I guess the one issue that I would take is that according to many people's views, it was truncated at the board level at the very end. But the process up to that point was quite good. Chair, I think that my recommendation would be that you exercise your discretion in terms of time limits. I think we can move through with a pretty good clip, probably as was suggested by Nicole and carefully suggested as well by Matt Hasty. Getting into wordsmithing in too detailed a fashion. And I'm a wordsmither, but I think I'm going to make your guys' lives hell. Yeah, I think we can probably go at a pretty good clip. I like your suggestion that we maybe try going down the matrix that's provided. I think some effort went into that, but we do so with efficiency in mind. And I certainly respect the need to end it at a reasonable time. And I think I'm comfortable with your discretion.
Perfect. Thank you. Commissioner Cyrus, have you had the opportunity to familiarize yourself with the matrix? I know that you are out of town right now.
I've got it in front of me.
Fantastic. All righty. Well, we shall commence then. Okay. Issue area number 1.
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yeah.
I just wanted to note one other thing. So as you saw in the staff memo, we included the full list of, I think, around 35 items that commissioners wanted to discuss relating to all topics.
Mhm.
So this evening, these touch on chapters 1 through 3 of the comprehensive plan. We did have recommendations to review 2 letters, one from Central Oregon Land Watch and one from Central Oregon Irrigation District. And those include quite a few edits that touch on a variety of different chapters. And again, some of them are, wordsmithing, some of them are, kind of minor terminology recommendations. So what we did include in the matrix are the items that were specifically called out by commissioners. There are a couple from the Land Watch letter that were specifically called out. But otherwise, as we get into the next steps following this review, that's part of what we'll want to discuss is how to approach those letters. Is there a desire to go through them again, line by line item, of which there are quite a few edits. I'd say Land Watch alone had somewhere near 70 edits. So we'll want some additional feedback from the commission on how to approach that. But for this evening, we just kind of wanted a warm up of starting with some of these items. But I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you. So for issue area number 1 regarding goals, policies, or narratives in chapter 1, the items were continue engaging community on planning related topics and seeking out ways to engage with youth on planning related topics. Staff believes the existing policy language addresses these items. Would anyone like to discuss this, or is everyone comfortable with the current language? So the main support was public commenters expressed general support for targeted engagement to youth populations and generally more opportunities to be involved with planning related issues. How this is currently addressed is bullet points 1.17, 18, policy 1.22 and 1.26.
And if I may, Madam Chair, the key question there is, does the commission feel like that the current policies are adequate, or would you like to add one that's specific to youth engagement? If so, there's a recommended policy that we've added.
Okay. Oh, I did not. Okay. I apologize. When I read that, I didn't process it.
Madam Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Cyrus.
Yeah, I personally think the existing language is sufficient.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
I agree with Commissioner Cyrus and the staff comment that staff believes the existing policy language addresses the desire for continued community engagement on planning topics. Yeah, I'm in agreement.
Any other comment? Okay, I believe then that no motion is being made, and we shall continue on to issue area number 2. Should a policy be added to limit planning commission membership to residents of unincorporated areas? Currently, we appoint members through an open and public process to reflect the diverse geographic regions, demographics, and values of Deschutes County residents. There were several public commenters expressing interest in limiting membership to unincorporated residents. Does the planning commission feel that we should keep with staff recommendations, or do they feel that we should limit, opt for option A and limit planning commission membership to representatives residing in unincorporated Deschutes County?
Madam Chair.
Yes, Commissioner Cyrus.
Yeah, this is one that I think I would support the option of limiting it to unincorporated Deschutes County, simply because the incorporated areas have their own planning commissions that represent the citizens of those areas. And whereas those of us outside the unincorporated areas do not have an option to sit on those planning commissions and make rules and regulations and have input into those planning processes, I think likewise the representation for the county's planning outside of those incorporated areas should be limited to representation from those areas that are being impacted by the rules that are being affected. And it would also codify what the Board of Commissioners is currently doing. The last 2 commissioners it was required that they serve from unincorporated Deschutes County. And the current notice to serve the vacant seat also listed that in order to qualify, they had to be from unincorporated Deschutes County. And I think it would simply be a function of codifying what I think has become the practice and directive from the Board of Commissioners.
Any other input?
Chair,
Yes.
a clarification question then for staff on that. My perception is that what Commissioner Cyrus said about people needing to be from unincorporated county only applies to at-large positions. We still have our Bend area position, correct, and our sister areas position. I mean, in terms of how it's being practiced right now, I think the board is just having us recruit for at-large positions in the county.
Correct. There are geographic regions that are noted in the policy and procedures manual. The Bend area does extend east and west beyond the Bend proper, and the same is true for kind of Greater Redmond. But it's really, as staff notes in the staff comment, we believe it's ultimately the Board of County Commissioners is going to provide direction, and they're very well aware of the importance of having representatives from the unincorporated area. But we have had times in the not too distant past where we haven't had representation and we haven't had interest in planning commission vacancies. And so, again, I'm not trying to steer the planning commission one way or the other, but we believe that the existing code provides the flexibility and ultimately seek board direction about how they want to approach an at-large position, or a position when it opens up eventually, the Bend area. But there are some instances where when you get outside of Bend proper, there's not the geography gets really small. So I think the staff comments are reflect you're getting an honest assessment. Commissioner Cyrus is correct that the last two recruitments, I'd say the third, but with one that's happening now, are focusing on, of course, Tumalo area, and the at-large position for the second time, that the board recognizes the importance of having representatives from the rural county. But that's the context that reinforces the staff comment.
Chair.
Yes.
So in that case, I would be inclined to support the idea of keeping it the way it is, because I think that ultimately the Board of County Commissioners at whatever time now or in the future will appoint who they would like to appoint. And the way that it's currently worded gives them a lot more options to choose from. So if they got 5 really great candidates who all lived in towns, and then 1 or 2 candidates who lived in the county, then they would have more people to choose from for their appointment. And I think that would be a good thing, because I think ultimately the board should really be deciding who's on this commission at any given point in time.
Here.
Yes.
I agree with Vice Chair Curis on those comments. And my other thought was, I think what makes us all unique is that we all have different, unique perspectives from the county. And that's kind of why we were chosen to be on this board. And I feel that, let's say someone, lived in rural land and unincorporated area and then moved into the city, they would have also a diverse experience level and perspective but maybe their address is now in an incorporated area. And so then that would be immediately disqualified. And I don't think that's fair. So I think that limiting the scope of our applicants, like you said, that should be on the board to decide and not a policy. So that's my opinion.
Am I allowed to give input as chair while we're discussing? One thing I would like to say is, if we read the staff comments, it looks like the Board of County Commissioners did address this issue last year and decided to keep it the way it is. And another thought I have is that we are not just as planning commissioners discussing development, buildings, things like that. And people who live in Incorporated Bend, Redmond, Sisters, and Lapine do use county lands, for recreation, sometimes for work. And we would exclude a great number of people who use county resources. I would be inclined to keep the current language myself.
I'll just, please, Chair.
Yes.
Concur with the emerging consensus there. I don't think there's a need to further limit planning, to recommend rather, further limitations on planning commission membership. And, you know, the board may at its discretion choose to, I'm sure they will, again, revisit representation down the road, and that's their purview. And I agree with comments, colleagues. Yeah, thank you.
So at this point, it does not look like we have enough support for this issue. So I'm going to move on to issue number 3. Should area-specific policies for the Three Rivers area related to water quality and treatment, economic development, wildlife and growth be added to the Deschutes County 2040 plan? And if I may, Nicole, this does go toward, I believe, what were you saying? That this would be an action item. Am I correct in how I'm reading issue area number 3 as well as page 2 of your packet for today?
Sure. Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. So I would say that, you know, really there's a couple things here. So first, the existing policy notes supporting updates to unincorporated community area plans. So we think that having an area-specific policy for Three Rivers might be just a little bit out of lockstep with what we've done with Tumalo or Terrebonne in the past. But, you know, we did include, you know, an option for policy A. We noted that, you know, in the discussion from the last meeting, there was a little bit of concern because the last Newberry Country Plan didn't specifically call out Three Rivers. So we included a policy option there where you could say, you know, as if you really felt like it's necessary, although staff is intending to do that, if you wanted to memorialize it, you do have the option of noting, you know, hey, when you update this plan, please include that area specific analysis of Three Rivers. Otherwise, you know, I would say you could utilize that existing draft language and noting that staff has heard that feedback about incorporating Three Rivers in the Newberry Country Plan update and will, you know, of course, incorporate that suggestion when that plan is updated. And that will dive a lot more into, you know, that area specific analysis. It'll have its own goals and policies on those topics.
As someone who is the representative for the South County, could I make a request or maybe a question about, I don't know if it would be a stakeholder committee or coordinating with other agencies to see about getting the Three Rivers area officially an unincorporated community?
Madam Chair, if I may, in the packet for this evening, we included what we called a parking lot. And that's a place where when we were reviewing some of the suggestions from public comments, we found that there were some that were action items as we've discussed, but we've also found some items that are potentially precluded by state law. So we have received feedback from community members, and it's in the record, about this desire for an unincorporated community status. We did coordinate with Department of Land Conservation and Development, and it doesn't appear that there's currently a path allowed by law to, you know, upgrade them essentially to that status. Urban unincorporated communities and, you know, rural communities, which is what Tumalo is designated, those were pre-existing areas with dense development that were essentially pre-land use system. So essentially I believe it's 1994. So there isn't currently a path that we're aware of in which we could designate a new unincorporated community. But in talking with those community members, some of the desire to become that status is to tackle some of these issues related to water and economic development. So I think that we do still see a way to coordinate with community members on how to address some of the issues that are, happening in that community. But Peter, do you want to add anything else?
Yeah, I would stress even more definitively, Nicole's being very, very diplomatic. There isn't a process to create a rural area to be an unincorporated community in 2024. Linchpin of the Oregon land use planning system. And we are aware of the experiences that the Three Rivers residents are concerned about. So I don't want to dismiss that at all. But staff in more than one occasion has communicated to it. The state has done that, the Department of Land Conservation and Development. So that's why it's kind of in this parking lot area. I regardless of if you want to change the policy, there's an option there. I will tell you that we are well aware that when the Newberry Country Plan is in the scope of work is initiated and we're engaging in community conversations, and we're going to have to engage Three Rivers and listen to them as we would any of the sub areas, Hainer Park, Oregon Water Wonderland 1 and 2. There's a whole host of subsets there that may want to call out their areas definitively or may think of them as part of Newberry Country. We will reach out to them. We will understand their specific area-wide concerns and integrate that into the plan with your assistance. So whether you want to have a policy that specifically calls it out, that obligates us to engage the Three Rivers constituents, you can certainly do that. But know that we are aware of this responsibility. We are committed to ensuring that citizen involvement, community engagement is robust throughout this sub area of Deschutes County. So just want to emphasize that awareness.
All right, so Three River residents expressed concern that specific needs were not being addressed in the Newberry Country Plan or the 2040 Comprehensive Plan. If we choose to adopt option A, a new policy, as part of the Newberry Country Plan, include area-specific analysis of Three Rivers to identify challenges related to ongoing natural resource, water, and development-related issues. If no, we will keep the existing language. Does anyone have a thought on this?
If I may,
Mhm.
I think we've heard pretty definitively from staff that this probably wouldn't be recommended to pursue this. Do respect the needs to have Three Rivers included in some of the narrative specifically, and I think we've heard a commitment that I'm satisfied with from staff tonight.
Excellent. Any other comments? All righty, we will move past this. And I will say that I did find the Newberry Country Plan online. It's a 76-page document. And I might agree that staff believes it may be premature to present policy options. Okay, option 4, should policy language prioritize use of incentives over regulations? If yes, Planning Commission may recommend option A, where possible, explore landowner incentives to mitigate impacts from development and achieve community goals. If no, we recommend retaining the current language as drafted, and this would be Chapter 2, Policy 2.11 and Goal 2.4. Does anyone have a yay or a nay on this item?
I'm sure.
Yes.
This was related, I think, to one that I was interested in, just seeing where my colleagues stood on this. This was from the public record Land Watch's letter. And I think they raise a fair point that the existing language says, in that particular policy, I think you mentioned it's 2.1.1, but the current recommended draft language is balance the consideration of private property rights and the economic impacts of land use decisions on property owners with other community goals. And it's a little bit short there in terms of other community goals. And I don't know that it needs to be quite as extensive in its delineation there, and getting at what kind of broader goals we're talking about. But I think it's a fair point, to balance the verbiage earlier in that complex sentence about balancing private property rights and economic impacts and so forth, that we have a little bit more elaboration about what those broader community, wildlife habitat, agricultural and forest land goals might be. Just my comments, my 2 cents, but I want to hear what my colleagues think.
Commissioner Cyrus?
Yeah, I like the idea of incentive-based programs, and maybe I might just throw out the wildlife as an example. For those of us that have rural lands impacted by, or potentially impacted by wildlife, I think a lot of farmers, ranchers, rural landowners love to see the wildlife, and they would do what they could to incentivize and bring more wildlife onto their properties. On the other hand, if they're going to be hit by a lot of restrictions, if they have wildlife on their property, they're going to be less inclined to provide habitat and protection and benefits for the wildlife. Good example happened in our community. A bald eagle nest had been there for years, been very successful in fledging piglets, and had been there for years. And once it became known to the rest of the county and the population, it became one of the protected nests, and there were restrictions placed on neighboring properties. That nest disappeared overnight. It ended up at the bottom of the tree. I've got suspicions on maybe who did it, but bottom line is that nest was destroyed because of the negative impact it created on the adjacent properties, even though for years it had actually been protected by the local landowners up until the point the county put restrictions on their properties. And I think you're going to get a lot more benefit for wildlife, especially with education and incentives instead of being punitive.
Madam Chair.
Thank you. Yes, Vice Chair.
I think that is a striking example that Commissioner Cyrus provided. I too favor the idea of incentives over regulations, generally speaking, although it is hard to pay for incentives. One question I have that maybe Nicole, you or Matt may be able to clarify for me is I'm not sure about including incentives, or like when possible, it says where possible, explore landowner incentives to mitigate impacts, etc. Is this the place for that goal, or should this be more in the strategic plan or an action item, or should it depend like a case by case basis? I think maybe there's an argument to be made for putting it at this high of a level to indicate a county preference toward incentives, but I'm just not sure that if this is the place in the overall process for this, if someone like me favors this idea generally.
Yeah, Commissioner, I think that's an excellent question, and I invite Matt to add any additional detail as well. But I think this, if I remember correctly, this did come up when we were creating this policy 2.1.1 of how do we balance incentives and regulations. And when we're tackling impacts from development, how are we sensitive to community values for wildlife, but also recognizing private property rights? So that's kind of how we landed on that current language. So I'd say the option A is making that more explicit. And I would still say that it's still at the level of being a policy, whereas an implementation plan might recognize, how would we approach incentives? What do incentives look like? what is the process for creating those? So I think we tried to craft option 8 if you wanted it to be still more at the policy level. And then, of course, just wanted to note that's kind of a 3-part choice there of, do you like the current language? Do you like the new language that's more targeted toward incentives? Or, do you like the existing language with the land watch edits? So just wanted to call that out specifically. But Matt, do you have any other thoughts on kind of if one were supportive of incentives over regulations, if option A, kind of how you see option A, I guess.
Well, I guess, oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry, I meant Matt.
Oh, I
Hasty.
didn't know which Matt
Cyrus.
you were talking about. Sorry.
Matt H, I think. Yeah. Yeah, I'm actually going to take a quick step back and then I'll get to your specific question, Nicole. And I think my quick step back would be just to say, we in the commission had a lot of discussion around various policies, not just this one, but other ones that talked about balancing incentives with regulation and balancing private property rights with other economic impacts. And so I would just sort of remind y'all that there was a fair bit of discussion about this and other policies, and we kind of landed where we thought the group wanted us to land. And I would note that there are policies based on your discussion in some of the other chapters that talk about the importance of using incentives, including for wildlife habitat protection. So I just note that does come up in other places in the plan. And I would also sort of say that when I kind of looked back at the results of some of the engagement we did, and particularly the online engagement where we use this Considerate tool, I would say what we heard from people, they didn't seem to sort of, as a whole, recommend necessarily one approach or the other. They did seem, when we asked them about specific issues, there seemed to be kind of a general support for balancing those things. So I would say those things, just in terms of this as a general policy, in terms of, do you want to emphasize one thing over another? So that's just my perspective on that. In terms of, would policy A be an appropriate way to address this if you don't want to keep sort of the existing language? I think, yeah, because it sort of explores some opportunities to do this. I think that's not a bad route to go, but I also think that from my perspective, the existing language is pretty consistent with the discussions y'all had previously and with what we heard from the public during the engagement process. So that's just my perspective, and I'm not trying to tell you which way to go here, but those are my thoughts on that one.
Yes.
Thank you. In sort of hearing comments from my fellow commissioners, Commissioner Hovkamp about speaking about elaborating what are the community goals, taking that into consideration, also what Vice Chair Kiris was saying, and also Commissioner Cyrus about, I think it's attractive to offer incentives to people when possible, and looking at the Land Watch's suggested, without getting too much into wordsmithing, but looking at their suggested changes instead of saying where it starts with their language to say land use decisions on property owners with the need to preserve agricultural, et cetera. If we change that to incentives to preserve, that might sort of tie these things together, because it sounds like we're generally in support of incentives, and I don't disagree with their language. It may be, as Commissioner Hovkamp said, a little too specific, but if we could highlight that in addition to community goals.
That's good. Incentives right in there.
Commissioner Kelly?
That was great. I mean, I was kind of thinking the same thing, like, why do we have to choose one or the other? Like, why can't there be some kind of blend? And so thank you, Susan, because I was kind of thinking the same thing.
It's real good.
Commissioner Cyrus, do you have a thought on Commissioner Altman's input?
I do. I agree. We're certainly going to need to have regulation where necessary. I would just like to see us emphasize incentives where possible. Kind of the carrot and the stick. I think for the most part, we're going to get further with the carrot than we are the stick. And often, just like we talked before on the last topic about putting limits on the number of RV units, and the fact that it could backfire, and the fact that everybody goes out and applies in order to beat the impending limit or the perceived limit. Whereas if there's no limit and maybe nobody even applies, I think the same thing happens with a lot of the rules and regulations. You start imposing regulations, people are going to, as quickly as they can, go to the maximum possible of whatever it is that is coming down the pike, versus if you're looking at some opportunities for incentives, whatever they may be. I mean, for example, in development, in an RR10 zone, if you cluster your homes instead of doing 10-acre home sites, you get a density benefit. I mean, it doesn't have to necessarily be monetary incentives, but if the commission or the planning staff or whomever, whatever it is we're doing, looks toward incentives first, I think that's all I would look toward in an incentive-based program is let's explore opportunities for incentives before we look to the regulations.
Thank you. Nicole, is this something where we could ask the staff to maybe look at yes and maybe look at COLW's no and see if there's something can that be rewritten between the two of them? It sounds like we have kind of some consensus on both.
Yeah, Madam Chair, if I may, I'm curious if Commissioner Altman's suggestion, it sounds to me like it may do that. So I'm curious on the group's thoughts. So just reading out what that would say: balance the consideration of private property rights and the economic impacts of land use decisions on property owners with incentives to preserve agriculture and forest land, wildlife habitat, ground and surface water resources, wetlands, riparian areas, open areas, and other community goals identified in the comp plan. So again, just changing the words "the need to" with incentives to. I'm so curious if the group feels that meets that desire.
Would anyone like to make a motion?
She's got it.
Yeah.
I think staff's
And we
got it.
haven't made any other motion.
Okay, so it sounds like we do have a majority agreement on the COLW no, with the change of the need to with incentivize to preserve. So we do have a majority agreement. Okay.
I think we wordsmith though.
I'll allow that one, Commissioner.
First one's free.
We just wordsmith. Oops.
Okay, so item 5, should additional policy language address enforcement of existing codes and laws? There was a commenter expressed support for enforcement of existing regulations and laws prior to establishing new codes and laws. If yes, we would have policy to analyze resources to enforce new regulations prior to adoption. Staff recommends the PC maintain current language. Does anyone have any thought or input on this? Commissioner Hovkamp?
This is kind of the inverse of the incentive, I guess. Here's the stick. I don't know that it's necessary. I'm inclined to go along with staff recommendation there, myself personally.
Anyone else? Commissioner Cyrus, your thought?
I don't think it's necessary.
All righty, we will move on to item 6. Should the county integrate Central Oregon Land Watch's recommended edits to the Agriculture and Forestry Comprehensive Plan designation purpose statements in their December 14, 2023 letter? Support was COLW and other commenters expressed general support. There appeared to be no opposition. If yes, the Planning Commission may recommend option A. Definition from planning goals: agriculture to preserve and maintain agricultural lands, forest to conserve forest lands by maintaining the forest land base and to protect the state's forest economy, by making possible economically efficient forest practices that assure the continuous growing and harvesting of forest tree species as a leading use on forest land consistent with sound management of soil, air, water, and fish and wildlife resources, and to provide for recreational opportunities and agriculture. If no, we will retain our current language. Staff is strongly recommending that the definition remains as drafted. If the PC is interested in changing this definition, staff recommends the purpose statements be amended to list the purpose statement from each state planning goal to reduce confusion to community members and applicants.
Madam Chair.
Want to clear a little bit there?
Yeah, if the,
I'll just ask her.
Madam Chair, thank you. So, wanted to know, I apologize, I omitted the Central Oregon Land Watch proposed language, which I think would be helpful to understand. So I wanted to note that, the purpose statements are for the comprehensive plan designations, and the ones that we have today, the agricultural definition is essentially pulled from the state planning goal language. And then, same with the forestry purpose statement, although it's a little bit, amended. The one for, from the planning goals, as you can see, is quite large. So today we basically just amended it to being a little bit shorter and noting to conserve forest lands for multiple forest uses. What's recommended by Central Oregon Land Watch for each of these is adding on to that existing language from state law and noting and to protect forest lands from encroaching development impacts. I will say that staff just has some concerns if an application were to come forward and if this purpose statement were to be cited, how we would measure what that encroachment is, or how we would evaluate that. Because it doesn't come from state law, it would kind of be a local interpretation, and we have concerns that might confuse applicants, and we have some concerns that might potentially not hold up at Land Use Board of Appeals or the Court of Appeals. So that's why we as staff recommended you retain the current language. And if you said, hey, I want to refresh, I don't like the existing language, then to pull, verbatim from the state planning goals. And Will, I would love for you to add.
Yes, welcome back.
Yeah, thank you, your planning manager, Will Groves. The staff strong recommendation here comes from the fact that the Central Oregon Land Watch recommendation is unintelligible to me. They're saying that the purpose of forest land is to prevent the encroachment of uses on forest land. That would be the purpose of a land adjacent to forest land, would be the purpose to prevent encroachment on the forest land. So I think that whatever it is that they're trying to get at, they didn't write it correctly. I don't know what it would mean to say that the purpose of forest land is to prevent encroachment of other uses onto forest land. I think if they want this to go forward, they need to rewrite it. I can't tell what it means. I can't tell how it'd be operationalized. I don't know what the goal of it is. And, as such, I think, this would be a great chance for, at least the staff recommendation would be to send them back to the drawing board and say, hey, what do you want with this? I'm not sure, for example, in the MUA 10 zone, which is adjacent to many agricultural zones, it has a special setback of dwellings from 100-foot setbacks from the adjacent agricultural zone. So one of the purposes effectively of the MUA 10 zone is to protect adjacent agricultural zones from the encroachment of residential uses when butted up against MUA 10 zone. I don't know what they're trying to do with this, frankly. And the other significant hazard is that we have a purpose statement for these zones from the state statute. And to the extent that we get out of sync with that, we end up in a real problem. And that is that then we can't take advantage of the benefit of state law to say, all the case law that comes out of LUBA that says that, this stuff has been adjudicated in other counties at a state level. When we walk off that path, we invite our own appeal. We invite appeals against our local code that are time consuming and just as Nicole was saying, can sow confusion for both applicants and opponents. So I think that the notion of some of the problems that can happen from development to these lands, certainly there's a lot of information in the record and the history of farm and forest lands that when you move, for example, a ton of residences into forest land, farm or forest lands, that can affect those operations. Farmers, when you move people in, farmers leave. is, the evidence that we've seen over time. And so if in fact this is a notion that maybe non-farm dwellings should be approved less often, because putting those non-farm dwellings interspersed with other farm dwellings, that's an encroachment of uses that are allowed under statute in the farm zone. So I think that I could really use some clarification about what they're trying to accomplish with this language.
Nicole, question for you. So if the planning commission said yes, the verbiage on the agriculture and forest, is that something that the staff rewrote based on the idea of Landwatch's input, or is that I'm just trying to determine where this came from if it's not from that letter?
Yes, excellent question, Chair. So I will note that we as staff didn't include the Landwatch language as a suggestion because we are so concerned about it. So what you see under option A is direct pull from the statute. So really agriculture is the same, but forest, it's adding quite a bit of additional detail. Whereas what we have currently is just, again, the abbreviated to conserve forest lands for multiple forest uses. So you have the option to retain that, but we just wanted to provide, if you wanted to go direct verbatim from statute, that's what it would say.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
can I please, the suggested language to those definitions from Landwatch added 9 words onto the definition of agriculture and onto the definition of forest. And they're the same 9, almost the same 9 words. The 9 words added on to the agriculture definition in the draft language, first of all, the existing suggestion in the draft language is to preserve and maintain agricultural lands for farm use, which is succinct and, pretty straightforward. Landwatch suggests adding 9 words on that, and to protect agricultural lands from encroaching development impacts. And that's it. That's all they're suggesting. And I think where they're coming from, I respectfully think the intent's pretty clear, that Landwatch has made their position, abundantly clear that the primary threat to farmlands in Deschutes County as a poster child for sprawl, ultimately in the state, is development in one form or another, that it degrades lands that are available for agriculture. Similarly, the purpose statement, as it suggests right now for forest land in the existing language, is quite succinct and elegant in that way: to conserve forest lands for multiple forest uses. All Landwatch is suggesting is, I think it's again 9 words, if I counted right, 9 or 10 words, and to protect forest lands from encroaching development impacts. And I understand what staff is saying, and actually I concur to a large extent, but the intent is clear and the language is still succinct. The primary threat to both agricultural and forest lands, I think this is demonstrable in a number of different ways, is encroaching development, certainly in Deschutes County. But anyway, personally, I'm somewhat in concurrence with staff alarm at straying too much from sort of state mandated language. And I'll defer to my colleagues. I want to hear what they have to say. I don't think Landwatch is suggesting anywhere near this kind of language. Yeah. Colleagues?
Peter?
I think Will had his hand up first.
Oh, I wanted to dig in a little bit. I had looked at a different spot in the Landwatch conversation and looked at their forest land impacts that they didn't elaborate on. In the farmland impacts, they actually do specify what they're trying to achieve here. And I think that it's important to convey that. So they go on after the proposal to say that farm uses in Deschutes County are facing increasing pressures and conflicts from non-farm uses, including ORS 215, 283 sub 2 uses and plan amendment zone change applications to rezone agricultural land. So much as the purpose statement for the surface mining zone is to protect surface mining resources from development impacts, so should agricultural lands be protected from development impacts. So they do actually, at a different place than I referenced, they explain this a little bit better. So they see the encroachment of development impacts are those developments that are occurring in agricultural lands as specifically currently allowed under state statutes. So what the notion of encroachment is there. And just wanted to update my previous statement to reflect a little bit of additional reading.
So, oh, sorry.
No, Madam Chair, I think there's a couple observations that I would offer to supplement why staff is taking such a strong approach. We do not, if you include language that is trying to address encroachment, what we don't know is the Deschutes County experiences the most non-resource land plan amendment zone changes of any county. And when you want to amend the comprehensive plan and zoning code, you have to demonstrate compliance with the comprehensive plan. And so when you have language that is underscoring the issues with encroachment, you're deliberately, in my opinion, adding a constraint to that process. So this is more than just a policy, and I think I know that there's specific policies that speak to non-resource lands amendments, and I think you'd probably be better off talking about, if you want to get into non-resource lands amendments, talking about that at that time. That's observation number one. So there's real consequences with this kind of policy, and we will be obligated to communicate that to the board to the extent that there was a policy that wanted to incorporate that language. There's also two other, one's a project, the other is a recent Court of Appeals decision that is setting case law that on the face of it is making it more difficult today to rezone farmland and potentially forest land. This is the 710 Eden property. I was going to highlight this during my staff comments at the end of the meeting, but there's case law came out of that plan amendment zone change near Redmond that puts a greater responsibility on the applicant to demonstrate that the conversion of rezoning farmland through a non-resource lands process, one has to evaluate and demonstrate that rezoning doesn't impact the ability to use agricultural land that's nearby. And I'm not saying it as perfectly as Stephanie will, but that is a significant burden that is going to follow all future plan amendment zone change. And this case law will evolve. And before I get to let Stephanie kind of refine that summation, there is also a concurrent process happening right now with the Department of Land Conservation and Development. They are doing a farm and forest improvements project. They have a steering committee that has made recommendations that could lead to rulemaking that is getting to some of these issues about how to protect Oregon's farmland now and into the future, and identifying the risks that have been occurring cumulatively as it pertains to non-farm uses, non-farm partitions, non-farm dwellings, non-resource lands amendments. So long and the short of it is, the reason why I think staff is taking such a strong position is that there's other processes already in place that are structured to ensure that agricultural and forest lands retain their protections that are in place today for tomorrow. And so I'll stop there.
Counsel?
Yes. Excuse me. Stephanie Marshall, Assistant Legal Counsel. Yes, and I think you did a great job. It is kind of hard to piece it all together. And the Court of Appeals only addressed one of the assignments of error. Typically, they could just say affirmed without opinion, and they decided to dig in a little bit further. And I think that they wanted to make it really clear the point that they were making, which is one of the tests that you look at when you're determining whether a property is agricultural land. It's dry, it's rocky, it's all these other things, but it's zone DFU is whether it's necessary to permit farm activities essentially on an adjacent parcel. And so in this case, you know, and I agreed, you know, yeah, well, this part of, nobody wants to farm this property, so it's not necessary to farm that property. The Court of Appeals is like, no, it's more nuanced than that. Is it necessary that this remain resource land zoned? It's not, do we have, you know, is it gonna, you know, we need to combine these parcels here together, you know, this farm needs this farm to operate. No, it's this farm needs this to remain resource zoned. So I think that that's important, and it will be very interesting to see how this rolls out, not only here in Deschutes County, but, you know, elsewhere. But you know, that was a really important distinction that the Court of Appeals made. And I mean, they thought it was important enough to say, this is what we mean, because otherwise they would have just said, nope, we're just affirming LUBA. So any questions on that? I have a scratch.
Not on that now.
Alrighty, at this point, oh,
If just one thing to mention, I respect staff's position and I am in favor of being consistent with state statute. I would just point out that I believe that Land Watch brought something before the Planning Commission to put language that would match state statute. So this is like kind of the opposite of that they want to have language that doesn't match state statute. So I'm all for consistency. So I respect staff's position and I would agree with their wishes.
Will?
Just to amplify one thing that our planning director mentioned is that I think maybe the intention here is that, you know, so in ORS 215, there are what are called sub 1 uses that counties must allow. Those are our farm uses and certain things that just have to go in on certain farmlands. And then there are these sub 2 uses that every county can either allow or not allow. And you could, as a county, say, you know what, we're not going to have any non-farm dwellings. We're not going to have any, you know, this long list of kind of optional things you can have. Winery, I think winery is a sub 1. But I'll get the list of sub 2 in front of me here shortly. And so I think if the notion is that these sort of add-ons and maybes, you know, that come out of the sub 2 list are cumulatively impacting farmers' abilities to successfully operate, to find land, to buy land, to get water, you know, to not feel squished in their operations. I think that rather than changing the purpose statement of the zone, I think you would then want a policy that says that, you know, we generally don't like some of these sub 2 uses, or we'd want to see them, you know, limited or regulated in some way because the county's allowed to do that. So again, sub 1 uses, mostly farming things and farming supportive activities, mandated. Sub 2 uses optional. And the county to date, I think, has taken almost all of the optional sub 2 uses and said, yeah, those are a maybe. Let's think about it. And if, you know, you were having a problem with, you know, some of those maybe activities, particularly non-farm dwellings affecting farmers' abilities to operate successfully, I think you would split that into a separate policy that identified these specific sub 2 conditional uses that, you know, aren't actually farming. You know, maybe we should be more careful about them, or maybe, you know, take a different approach with them. But I don't know if the purpose statement is the place to do that.
And just for the commission, there is a policy later on that sort of kind of gets to what Will's talking about. It's at least the income producing activities. That's number 9. So just wanted to point that out.
Any other input?
Madam Chair?
Yes, Commissioner Cyrus.
Yeah, I would tend to agree with staff. And it seems to me like, you know, the next thing we're going to be dealing with is clear and objective standards. And the proposed language is headed in the opposite direction. We do have right to farm ordinance in place. You know, we might take a look at strengthening some of the right to farm so that we don't have adverse impacts on agriculture. And I find a little bit of irony in the fact that only a couple meetings ago, we were discussing whether or not to limit public trails adjacent to resource lands because of the negative impacts on agriculture. But that seemed to be okay. But now we're discussing, you know, other activities that even may be agricultural in nature as being adverse to agriculture. And I just, like I say, maybe it's lost on other people, the irony of the inconsistency between the protections of agriculture and the ignoring the importance of agriculture and the impacts, whether it's something that people want from a recreational standpoint or somebody that wants to live on. So anyhow, I would agree with staff, and I think the language should be left the way it is.
Thank you. Do we have a general consensus on that at this point?
What do you mean by general consent? Are you asking each of us what we think, or?
I'm just getting some head nods that we are not going to adopt.
I don't want to adopt the language.
Okay, yep. Nope. On that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know what everyone else thinks, but
General
I can speak for myself.
Yeah.
Yes.
Alrighty, so item 7, should the county integrate Central Oregon Land Watch recommended edits relating to coordination with federal agencies? There was no opposition, for the most part. Staff, was comfortable with the edits. They did, cross out a couple of different words so that if we did make the recommendation, we would have a policy verbiage that would be amended to collaborate with federal agencies on land management issues, including homelessness, wildlife habitat restoration, water quality, road networks, energy projects, the impacts of recreation, and the expansion of sustainable recreation opportunities. If no, we will retain the current language. And that current language is in the second column.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
could I make a motion on this point?
If you're ready to, unless anyone would like to discuss prior. Alrighty.
Madam Chair, I would just have a
Yes.
question for staff as far as what the impacts and purpose of this is. What's the intent? Does it mean that the federal agencies would coordinate with the county on impacts and management of federal lands? Or is the county looking to solicit input from federal operators to impact private lands?
Yes. Thank you, Commissioner, for your question. So I would say, this was an aspirational policy it's a two-way street. So I would say when we had stakeholder meetings with our federal agency partners, primarily the BLM, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and the Forest Service, and also I'll stop there. U.S. Fish and Wildlife, thank you. We just talked about the need to coordinate on regional issues. So this was just a policy in support of that coordination, just to memorialize the desire for that coordination. So I think for instance, we're a coordinating agency in reviewing the BLM's sage grouse plan, which impacts federal lands. But we're reviewing that document and participating in that process as a cooperating agency. And also, the Forest Service participates in some of the conversations that our Board of County Commissioners have on homelessness that, is on federal lands, but also on land adjacent to federal lands. So again, it was intended to be a coordination policy. And I believe the edits from Land Watch are just listing, some additional, items for coordination. I think our only concern was that with that suggested language is the use of the word excessive road networks. We just weren't sure, why that language was in there, and we didn't think it was necessary. So that was our only edit.
So, Madam Chair, can I continue with the motion, please?
Absolutely.
Thank you. I move that the county integrate Central Oregon Land Watch's recommended edits related to coordination with federal agencies, to wit, policy 2.2.6, change the language to read, collaborate with federal agencies on land management issues, including homelessness, wildlife habitat restoration, water quality, road networks, energy projects, the impacts of recreation, and the expansion of sustainable recreation opportunities, period.
Do I have a second?
Second that.
And further elaboration or just move forward?
Not much elaboration, simply, I note that there was an appreciable, opposition in the record and that staff doesn't really see any major concerns with proposed edits. As, Senior Planner Mardell just mentioned, it's aspirational language and just suggests that we collaborate on these issues. And I think it's a good edit.
Anyone else? All in favor, raise your hand.
Aye,
And Mr. Cyrus, is that an aye?
yes.
Alrighty, unanimous. I say aye as well. Alrighty, item 8, should the planning commission incorporate changes to further limit rezoning of farmland? If yes, the planning commission may recommend removing policy 3.3.6, which is in support of exploring new classifications and redesignation of farm zone land. If no, the planning commission could utilize the existing language in this policy to support retention of accurately designated agricultural lands while recognizing the state allows for rezonings if specific statutory criteria are met and expressing interest in exploring a new zoning classification. And it does not appear the staff has a real big, but Nicole?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to note that sub policy A, that's existing. That's from the current comprehensive plan. And that supports essentially the status quo. Whereas if you own an EFU property and you want to rezone it to rural residential, so multiple use agricultural is typically what we see. This policy notes you can do that on a case by case basis as long as you comply with state statute, administrative rule. B was added in following extensive discussion with the Planning Commission about essentially creation of a new zone that's maybe slightly higher acreage than MUA 10, but it's something that a property owner who doesn't want EFU zoned land or doesn't want to utilize water rights, for instance, something that they could opt into that isn't the 10-acre smaller parcel size. And that kind of was balancing some feedback that we heard with a desire for folks to allow for housing in a limited circumstance while still preserving some of the benefit of EFU, which is that it's kind of a de facto open space in a way, and it preserves that larger acreage in the rural environment. So that's some of what I wanted to note there. And then with the support and the opposition, I would say very similar concerns to what we heard during our engagement process leading up to drafting that text.
Madam Chair,
Yes.
question for Nicole. Could you clarify how option B is it says incorporate changes to further limit rezoning of farmland. Can you explain how option B would be in some ways limiting rezoning of farmland?
I apologize if I was unclear. It wouldn't further limit rezoning of farmland. Option B, it just would create, a new non-resource land category and would explore that process. It wouldn't necessarily create it. It would just note to staff, hey, we're interested in this. Someday staff initiate the process for this to explore this type of zoning district.
Okay, that's what I thought, but then I started to second guess, like, am I missing in some way that I'm not understanding. I do have a question in general about communicating about this option. I'm curious what everyone else thinks, but I remember from our prior conversation that there was a lot of interest among us on this option. How might we, if we do indeed share an interest in that option, how would we indicate that to the board through this process? Because the language is already in there, but I guess I'm wanting to say, hey, board, look at this. This is really cool. If the planning commission is still excited about it, how do we say we're excited about this, but we don't think it needs any changes?
I think that's a great question, Commissioner. And
Highlight it, italicize it, underline it.
We always give a staff report at the public hearing and at deliberations, and I think we as staff could emphasize the Planning Commission really wanted to elevate this topic, to note to the board that if the commission were supportive, we could note they're very supportive of this and wanted to elevate it for the board's consideration.
Okay, so so we could discuss, see what everyone thinks, but we don't have to have a change to the language in order to indicate our interest if we have interest.
Correct. You could direct staff to emphasize it to the board.
There you go. That's what I was looking for. Thank you.
And I have a question. So if yes, so we would remove 3.3.6 and A and B, is that correct?
Correct. If you wanted to further limit rezoning of farmland, then rather than creating a new policy, which would contradict another policy, we felt that the option there would be to remove 3.3.6, which you could remove A and B, or if you felt, hey, we want to retain the status quo, you could just, remove 3.3.6 as the policy and B and preserve A, if that's clear.
All righty.
And Madam Chair,
Yes.
to be clear, staff will, to the extent that you wanted to remove 3.36, including sub A, staff will be obligated to emphasize to the board that it's this policy currently that provides really the basis for our local comprehensive plan that allows property owners on a case-by-case basis to demonstrate to an independent soil scientist and through a public proceeding that they don't have agricultural lands as defined by the state. And while we've had properties that have gone to the Court of Appeals and have been unsuccessful, we've had several properties that have gone to LUBA and have been affirmed, and that have been affirmed at the local level. And so this policy is as structured now provides the momentum locally to make those applicant initiated requests. And it's something that property owners have utilized since 2007.
Commissioners, anyone with input on this?
Question for staff?
Yes.
So under this item in our matrix, let's see, the language is in the draft. Is it in the existing comprehensive plan in that form or close to that form?
Sub A is, sub B is new, and that's the concept that we've talked about periodically, Madam Chair, if I may, that the county could explore, and it basically it embellishes what B is stating, is that the county could develop, and it would be cutting edge, it'd be precedent setting potentially, but there could be a community conversation that says, we understand that there's lands that some may think are misdesignated or mischaracterized, but there's a process on an individual basis to demonstrate that you shouldn't be zoned EFU. Then the question becomes, the fallback has always been either rural industrial, that's been a recent trend, but predominantly rural residential exception, or multiple use agricultural 10 or rural residential 10. There could be opportunities to talk about a different zone with that allows different uses, that looks at that opportunity in ways that maybe takes a more holistic look at how that land could redevelop and have more economic opportunity than presently available, but is seen to be more compatible with adjoining properties, including agricultural lands. We had talked about a high desert zone and maybe having lower densities for rural residential development as an example. So it's a novel concept, and one that the planning division has talked about internally for some time, that we think, if there was that could have value at some point in the future, especially as you look at as the city of Bend is growing over time. There's been a number of non-resource land amendments on the eastern flank of Bend, where we've formally expressed our concerns that that land could get subdivided into 10-acre parcels, which would limit the city's ability to urbanize over time. And so you could, in certain circumstances, allow for rezonings to occur, but allow the zoning or the redevelopment to occur at a rate that allows for lower residential development. And if Bend expands over time, they can urbanize because a majority of the land is designated for open space until such time it's urbanized. So that's a concept that has been discussed internally, that, like I said, may have value, maybe not tomorrow, but in the years ahead.
Okay, well, thank you, Director Gutowski. Then, colleagues, I guess I'm of two minds about this. I'm excited.
We have Mr. Hasty has his hand up, and Commissioner Cyrus, I know that you would like to comment, but I thought that if Mr. Hasty spoke first, we might get some additional information.
Okay, I was kind of wanting to finish my comment in
Okay.
regards to Peter, but if that's okay.
Absolutely.
So, thank you. So, lots to be excited about here, the potential, I suppose, particularly if this is a mechanism to more realistically classify some land, maybe provide for protections of open space, of lands that have value. It acknowledges that land is not necessarily either forest and farmland or developable, but that there might be a third way. So but I'm also very, very wary of that this is also a potential opening for a lot more rural development on resource land. So it's fraught, it's exciting, but it's fraught. And thank you for that, Chair. I'm sorry to go on.
Mr. Hasty?
Just very briefly, I want to kind of reiterate what this note says about staff's note, which is that we had extensive conversation with you all about this topic, and you were, as a group, supportive of sub item B, and there was excitement about it. And it's, I would call it, quite consistent with what we heard from a majority of people in the community when we asked about this topic in a couple of different ways. And there was really no kind of desire on your part to remove sub item A. You all agreed that that makes sense. That's consistent with state law. So I would go back to what we all said at the start of this. Unless your minds have really changed about this, the existing language is very consistent with the previous discussions you all have had about this. So I'm just kind of noting that or reminding you all of the previous discussions. So thank you.
Commissioner Cyrus?
Yeah, it's certainly an interesting topic. There's no question but there's a lot of EFU lands that never should have been designated EFU. I mean, back to the original history, bottom line is that they were working on designating EFU lands based on agricultural abilities and economic values, and ran out of time and basically threw everything in with a broad brush. And a lot of the lands that are designated as EFU have never been, never will be agricultural in nature. They don't have soils that support viable agriculture, and they either don't have water and or climate, and they never will be productive unless you put a greenhouse on them, which you could do that on any Walmart parking lot. There's a lot of lands that have already been, that are still designated EFU, that are in such small parcels that they're not economically viable as agricultural parcels, and quite frankly, probably should be rezoned into something else, whether it's an RR or an MUA. I could also see if you designated a new zone, maybe you have an MUA 20 or something that's more of a transitional parcel. But I think it's certainly appropriate to take a look at, maybe a wholesale look at what we have and what makes sense. And, maybe your half-acre parcels shouldn't be EFU anymore. Maybe those need to be, at one point when in the 90s, when they did the subzones, they determined that anything of 10 acres and less was not agricultural in nature, and took them completely out of the calculations when they created the lot size averages. They didn't take them out of EFU, but they took them out of the calculations in order to determine average lot sizes for those subzones. And so a little bit of a inconsistency in the fact that the committee determined that they weren't viable agricultural parcels, but yet they still used them in the data set. So I think it makes sense to take a good hard look at what is, what isn't, especially when we're going to start getting into clear and objective standards. Let's figure out what does make sense as far as true agricultural designations. And there should be an economic viability criteria along with that. You know, we've got soils, we've got climate, we've got water, we've got some of these other things. You know, they should be economically viable in order to be preserved as agricultural.
Thank you. So I would ask the commissioners, is there anyone who is in favor of removing policy 3.3.6, or shall we just say nope and go to item 9? All righty. We're saying nope and going to item 9. Oh.
Is there an option of emphasizing option B and discussing that? I mean, if we were doing motions, I would move to ask staff to emphasize item B to the board, and then we could see who agrees and disagrees. But
No, I think that would be a positive from what we're, and especially I know someone who is a farmer. Commissioner Cyrus thinks it's an interesting idea and could kind of help tidy up our books. So emphasize 3.3.6B. Sound good?
yeah, as long as everyone's in agreement, or not. I don't want to, I don't, it seemed like maybe Commissioner Hovkamp was maybe not in agreement with that. I don't know where Commissioner Altman's at with it. It sounds like Matt maybe is or Commissioner Cyrus is maybe in agreement. I didn't hear from Commissioner Kelly, so I don't know that it would be fair for just you and I to agree that it's a good idea.
If, would it be okay to say that there were some commissioners who were excited about 3.3.6B
Yes, I believe so.
and some who were just ready to move on to 9?
This is very, very complex. I've thought about this at length. I see the logic in it. My thought is a little like personal, that we have this like part of our land that if I don't water it, it looks like high desert junk. It looks like, you know, if I water it, which I have the rights to do and I should do it, and now that we have someone doing it, it looks gorgeous and it's producing so I'm conflicted with the idea of this non-resource farmland, because I do think that it's very much determined on the user and what kind of practices they're using. And so, yeah, I think this is very interesting. I think it's great to continue. I like the idea of exploring it, but I'm not emphasizing it, I should say. I'm curious. I'm just not, because I just think there's so many variables in determining the resource of the land. So that's just why I'm personally has thought of this a lot.
So the commission is not doing anything with this, but there are some commissioners who think it's interesting and would like to see the exploration.
And I, Madam Chair, too, just to add
Yeah.
on lastly, not to belabor this point, but this is an important one. It has the potential here, some good potential. I just want to reemphasize that, in my view, when one sees even privately owned land that is undeveloped in rural areas, and if it is deemed by whatever process or by whatever group that it's not truly resource land, that doesn't mean in my mind that the only alternative is that it's then sacrificed. That there may be a third way, and it, anyway, enough said there. Thanks.
Yeah, Madam Chair.
Yes.
I haven't commented yet, but I'm in agreement with Commissioner Hovkamp. I think it would be interesting to have, maybe you could call it rural residential open space or something like that, but to see that as, ooh, we're gonna put 50 houses here, I'm opposed to that.
Yeah.
So keeping it as, if you incentivize, as we talked about earlier, a property owner to keep it as open space, they don't have to use it as farmland. That's great, but I would be opposed to it just as a blanket opportunity for development.
No, absolutely. And I did not view rezoning as just for development only. I saw it as other options. So that's how I interpreted it. All righty, item 9, should policy language pertaining to flexibility for income producing supplementary activities on farmland be strengthened? If yes, the planning commission may recommend the language in option A as support income producing supplemental activities on farmland. If no, the planning commission may recommend retaining current language. There was support and opposition. And upon reading staff notes, they do recommend retaining the current language. Up for discussion? As it currently is, continue to review and revise county code as needed and consistent with state rules and regulations to permit alternative and supplemental farm activities that are compatible with farming, such as agritourism or commercial renewable energy products. That is how projects. That is how it currently reads. Do we want to add an additional policy that says support, and I'm going to maybe correct that, income producing instead of incoming producing supplemental activities on farmland, or do we want to retain the current language as drafted?
Madam Chair.
Yes.
In my view, I agree with the staff recommendation there. I think the proposed policy language actually captures what the supporters are trying to get at there. So that's my recommendation.
All right. Anyone else?
Madam Chair.
Commissioner Cyrus?
Yeah, I have kind of mixed between what's been recommended. I would not support the renewable energy projects, especially the solar farms, because they absolutely are commercial and would completely destroy the agricultural land that's under it. They have to sterilize the soil, put gravel down. It's basically putting a parking lot on a field. With regard to agritourism, I certainly support that. And, the state is promoting agritourism. Federally, it's one of the things that they've been promoting on agricultural lands. It's an opportunity to, as we go back to the incentivize process, incentivize retention of agricultural lands by allowing farmers to come up with an alternative way of earning income in order to keep the farm viable. I absolutely support the agritourism opportunities, but would oppose the natural or the green energy projects that they're putting on farmland.
So currently, the comprehensive plan has the verbiage for renewable energy projects in it.
Correct, Madam Chair. So that language actually came from the existing comprehensive plan. So what we currently have from the 2010 document notes that such as agritourism or commercial renewable energy projects, we essentially tweaked this policy to essentially say continue to, review and revise county code as needed. And then we added since 2010 and, ensuring it's consistent with state rules and regulations. So that's kind of what we added, but I would say if the commission would like to strike commercial renewable energy projects, that is an option available to you.
And Madam Chair, what I have
Yes.
to remind the planning commission is the rigor that goes into establish will mention sub 2 uses, whether that's commercial activities in conjunction with farm use or in wind renewable energy projects like solar, there's a farm impacts test, which is incredibly rigorous, where one has to demonstrate that that use is not going to impact agricultural uses and farm practices. And the application of the farm impacts test is being revisited at a state level to ensure that it's being applied consistently throughout the state, because case laws continues to be ever evolving. I think the state over time will codify that in administrative rules. So to the extent that, for Commissioner Cyrus, who's concerned about the implications of renewable energy like solar, or for those that are concerned about commercial activities in conjunction with farm use, the tail wagging the dog, that's an income a use that's overriding agricultural as the primary use. The rigor in state law, I think, on exclusive farm use zone land, to the greatest degree possible, ensures that level of analysis is performed. And in our case, any of those types of uses would likely find themselves at a public hearing. So there's a lot of rigor in place today to ensure that those type of uses are evaluated to ensure that they're not disruptive of neighboring farm practices and activities.
May I?
Yes.
I am in support of this language. I know that
The current language?
yes, the adding, I support adding support income producing supplemental activities on farmland. And I feel pretty strongly about this, because I think it's very difficult for farmers to make money on farming. And I think that if they can enhance their income by being creative in farm to table dinners, in farm stands, and I understand that could be included in agro-tourism. I understand that probably is included, but I like the verbiage support using, because I do think they need our support if they are going to be successful. And I also think that there's so many, that farming is a dying breed, and that there are young people with new creative ways to farm and sell their goods. And I like the terminology support.
Instead of maybe adding a new policy, could we amend 3.2.6 to say permit and support alternative and supplemental farm activities? Or is that a little wavy gravy?
Will, I think that's okay, but I'm double checking with Will.
I think it might be helpful. I actually didn't know the answer to this question, and I was wondering, what are the universe of income producing supplemental activities on farmland? And so I did a quick survey of this, and they include commercial activities in conjunction with farm use. So I might have, a meadery in association with my honeybees. I might have a commercial utility facility. So that could be a big solar project or wind project. There's home occupations. I make salsa in my garage. I teach piano lessons out of my house. There's commercial dog boarding kennels, room and board arrangements. I run a bed and breakfast essentially. There's a landscaping contracting business, equine affiliated therapeutic counseling activities, guest ranches, childcare facilities, agritourism, other commercial events and activities. So your pumpkin patches. So there's a pretty wide variety of those things. And I heard from the commission that there's some interest in supporting those activities that are, sort of enhancing the agricultural product. And also there's some interest in if they want to have a childcare facility or a guest ranch, or a landscaping contracting business, that's good as well. So I just wanted to acknowledge that, that there's a pretty big universe there that ranges all the way from commercial wind power all the way to somebody teaching piano out of their house. And if the intent is to really promote those activities that cause farmers to make farm products, that's one thing. If it's just to, keep farmers on the land in any way possible, that's another, without leaning on it in any way. But I thought that might be help you structure your thoughts about it.
And commissioners, it's currently drafted to note that it's, supportive of supplemental farm activities that are compatible with farming. And then, you know, if you wanted to further clarify what Will was mentioning, and I think the agritourism piece sounds like it's, you know, pretty in line with what some of the support I've heard so far. But you could add additional examples as well, or you could direct staff to add additional examples to avoid.
I see the difference, what you're saying, supplemental activities on farmland. So it's kind of, I see what you're saying there. And I understand that that's not my intention, you know, of my support. So thank you for clarifying that, because I read it as one, you know, linked instead of two things. So I'm wondering if we can use support in such as supporting, or, I mean, I don't,
Commissioners, I think to permit is a stronger verb than to support.
Yeah.
To permit is, I mean, to permit it kind of leads to land use permit. I mean, so I think it may be, I mean, support is, I think, has an emotional, you know, connotation to it, but I mean, for just another perspective, you know, continue to review and revise county code as needed and consistent with state rules and regulations. You're playing by the legal framework to permit these types of alternative and supplemental activities. That's, I mean, for planner-ese, and maybe we're too close to the language that to me really shows strong support for those types of complementary land uses that enable agriculture to continue today.
I agree. So I retract.
I'm not trying, I was getting to the chairs you were wrestling. Are we really trying to get behind this? And I find that the permit verb is really strong.
I agree. And I changed my mind. I like the Kurt.
Madam Chair.
Yes.
I'd like to agree with Commissioner Cyrus, actually, and suggest just a slight tweak to the language, notwithstanding Peter's excellent points about the sort of larger consistency. If colleagues would be interested in this, to have that policy largely as is, but winding up with supplemental farm activities that are compatible with farming, such as agritourism or other small scale sustainable activities, rather than having that part in there that says commercial renewable energy products. It doesn't preclude that, but it emphasizes, I think, what we're trying to emphasize. And I think Matt brings up a good point about the impact of some of those large solar energy projects.
Madam Chair, I want to just apologize to everyone. I'm actually going to have to take off. I am going to watch the staff comments portion of the meeting when the video is posted. And I apologize. I don't plan to leave in the middle of meetings in the future, but I do need to make sure I have several things I need to do before I can actually get to bed. So great job running the meeting, and I will see you all in 2 weeks.
Yes. I will see you at the end of February. I think that is something where I don't do, are you folks comfortable with Commissioner Hofskamp's recommendation on
the verbiage? The verbiage would simply be, again, such as agritourism or other small scale sustainable activities. So these are compatible with farming.
And Nicole, you had said that staff could wordsmith that a little. Just that. Commissioner Altman, do you prefer to keep commercial renewables in, or would you like to add some of the items per se that Will listed?
Those don't specifically need to be added, do they? Thank you, Chair.
No.
I mean, they were just were those examples of things in this county, or just generally speaking that
That's just the kind of the list of what's on the menu of activities that are, that aren't strictly I'm growing plants and animals and making food, but here's other ways that the state has allocated opportunities to make money. And, I read this policy to say we're the state to come up with a new one. Let's say that, that there were, that for some reason giraffe training became a hip thing. And the state said, yes, you can do giraffe training clinics on your farmland. That would also then the county would be responsive and say, hey, we want to make sure that option is available too. That's what this policy would direct us to do.
And to address Commissioner Cyrus's comments, I mean, the state has determined that solar farms are an appropriate use for farmland.
Under
I mean,
very rigorous standards.
I mean, so, on the east side, we have a couple of very large solar farms on land that I don't think was necessarily usable for anything else. So it does allow somebody who owns EFU land to support renewable energy.
Some wildlife do rest under it for shade, small animals. It can collect moisture, condensation, and provide water.
Yeah, I'm not necessarily in favor of striking that from this language. I feel like for our last point, we're kind of getting to wordsmithing. I don't know how much
Nitpicking.
I want to nitpick that personally, but I do and hear everybody's feedback.
Commissioner Cyrus?
Yeah, I would like to add a little bit to that especially with regard to the solar farms. The wind doesn't have quite the impact because they stick them out in the middle of wheat fields, which we don't have too many of those in Central Oregon. But the solar farms, absolutely huge disruption for wildlife because first of all, they put up fences around them that wildlife can't get in or out of. And my brother happens to be the government trapper. And one of his jobs is wiping out all of the small animals out of these areas because the gophers and the rats and everything else tend to chew the cables, the electrical cables. And so pretty much any of these areas that have solar farms are devoid of all wildlife, just the nature of it. So yeah, they have a huge impact on the wildlife, and the land is sterilized. So even such time as the solar farms no longer are viable, they're no longer usable for agricultural either.
So Commissioner Cyrus, would you be amenable to either just striking that, if a motion were made either by you or I, say, striking that commercial renewable energy projects and just stopping that as such as agritourism? Or would you be amenable to, rather than trying to capture all of the different uses that Mr. Groves was alluding to, something like including such as agritourism or other small scale sustainable activities, or something else? Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I would. I think that makes sense. I'd love to see, farmers have the opportunity, like I say, be it a meadery with their beekeeping operation, or, wineries with the grapes, or whatever. I mean, recreational type activities that are farm related. But I know it's the politically correct thing to promote some of these green energy things, but some of these are just absolutely horribly destructive on the land, and the land just doesn't have an opportunity to ever come back from it.
Yeah, I actually agree with that a fair amount. Respectful to my colleagues, but I think of those things as giant wildlife walks. These great collectors that. So could I try a motion and just see how it goes?
Absolutely.
So I'm going to move that we modify that. I'm sorry to wade into wordsmithing, staff, but that policy 3.2.6 to read as is up to the concluding phrase, where it should now read such as agritourism or other small scale, that's hyphenated, I think, sustainable activities, period. And strike the commercial renewable energy projects, which if I'm understanding staff right, doesn't really exclude those. We probably couldn't, but it doesn't specifically call that out as something that's compatible with farming. So that's my motion.
Do we have a second?
I would second that.
All right. Any discussion?
Yeah. Well, sorry. Commissioner Hopekamp has the opportunity since he made the motion.
I've got nothing. Go ahead, Matt.
Yeah, the one caveat I would have is that the small scale hydro are one of the things that are certainly an opportunity for agricultural properties. Irrigation districts are putting them in. There's an opportunity. The micro hydros actually work in lieu of pressure regulators for irrigation systems, to where you can actually lower your pressure with a micro hydro that looks similar to a pump. But I don't know. Did it have to do with large scale or small scale? I don't recall operations.
Will? Small or large scale operations for supplemental?
It was phrased in the motion as.
I guess, commissioners, I just wanted to offer, just for the sake of conversation, you do have the option to add a period after agritourism as well.
Right. That's what I asked. Yeah, that's what I asked Commissioner Cyrus. We could do that.
But sorry, go ahead.
I think the scale is something that you could wordsmith here if you were wordsmithing
The
the scale of the operation. So if if there's right now it says commercial renewable energy projects, I think if you could go such as agritourism period, which doesn't exclude any other, but it's not or you could say something such as agritourism or other small scale sustainable activities.
which was the motion. So.
Yep.
Right. And I'm fine with that. If we're silent on it, it doesn't.
What's that, Matt? Sorry.
I didn't mean to interrupt. If we're silent on it, it doesn't necessarily prohibit or preclude it. It just doesn't say we're promoting it.
Right.
And maybe the micro hydros, such as basically all it is a pump sized device that feeds some power back into the grid, isn't even considered maybe it doesn't even require a permit.
All righty, we shall move to vote. Commissioner Hovkamp.
Can we have restated the motion? I'm sorry.
All righty.
I can do it if you want me to.
I don't mind doing it. So the motion on policy 3.2.6 is to reword it such as agritourism or other small scale sustainable activities. Commissioner Hovkamp.
Aye.
Commissioner Cyrus.
Aye.
Commissioner Altman.
I'll vote aye.
Commissioner Kelly.
Aye.
And I am going to abstain. So we have 4 yays and 1 abstention to amend policy 3.2.6, continue to review and revise county code as needed and consistent with state rules and regulations to permit alternative and supplemental farm activities that are compatible with farming, such as agritourism or other small-scale sustainable activities. All right. So we are done with today's matrix, and Nicole.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Commissioners. Just wanted to express my gratitude. I think the commission did a really great job this evening. This is a very complex, wide-ranging plan with a lot of meat that we could dig into. And I just wanted to say I'm very appreciative of staff. I know it is difficult to restrain oneself from wordsmithing. And I feel like tonight, you provided adequate direction to staff without getting, too into the weeds and making really good use of time. So just wanted to compliment the commission on that. I wanted to note that your next meeting on this will be digging into 2 very meaty chapters. This was, I would call, a warm up compared to those. So that is chapter 5, natural resources. And I just wanted to note, similar to this evening, we're going to include in the matrix, aside from, action items or things that may be precluded by state law, we'll include the items that commissioners provided to us that you wanted to include in the matrix. But again, when you're reviewing that matrix, feel free to come from the place of, you know, I really can't live without this. I want to discuss it, or, you know, on second thought, I'm fine moving past it.
What was the other chapter? I heard chapter 5,
Oh, I'm sorry, natural resources, and the second is natural hazards,
and that is,
chapter 7. Yes. So just keep that in mind. And we will look forward to the next meeting. So again, very much thank you to the commission. And the chair, thank you for running.
and Mr. Hasty, is there anything you would like to add?
Nope. Good job.
All right, thank you for
Yeah.
attending tonight.
Yep.
And Peter? We have now completed the meeting. We will have staff and commission comments.
Very brief, Madam Chair, the only other item I wanted to bring to your attention is this week, the Land Use Board of Appeal remanded the modification of Thornburg's final master plan. So on a number of points, but in any event, I anticipate that remand, if the past is any indication, that decision will likely get appealed to the Court of Appeals, but in any event, it's approximately 95-page decision. But the long and the short of it, given the hour, is it was remanded on a number of points.
The decision that permitted has been remanded, or
Correct. The hearings officer, the Board of County Commissioners ultimately reviewed it under appeal, approved the modification of the final master plan, dropping a golf course, addressing their water needs accordingly, through mitigation, through the retirement of acquired water rights, or at least water rights that they had intended to, are in the process of working with the OWRD, Oregon Water Resources Department, to acquire. The Land Use Board of Appeals found that that decision could not be approved and remanded it. They basically finding that they needed to do revisit the economic analysis in terms of the implications of dropping a golf course and what it meant economically for the feasibility of the overall project, what it meant to the number of employees, employee housing. And then they also found that there had to be substantial evidence in the record. And Stephanie, I'm looking at it over the corner of my eye, but found that there needed to be substantial evidence to demonstrate that Thornburg had the water rights or water mitigation to demonstrate that they could offset their impacts for water consumption. And so just the sheer act of applying for a water right, or the desire to retire, say, a water right, that in itself does not demonstrate that they have essentially mitigated their impact. So it was kind of on those two issues that it was remanded. I think it'll get appealed to the Court of Appeals, just because that's what happens with Thornburg. It extends continues to litigate, extends the overall timeline, but those were the two primary reasons.
dumb question for you. Is there an opposing party at LUBA, or is that just state review process? When the decision to remand, is there an appellant or something like that?
The Land Use Board of Appeals are 3 attorneys
Right.
that are appointed by the governor. That whole structure is trying to keep land use out of the courts. It's not always successful, but in this case, I don't think it will be. It'll go to the Court of Appeals, as did the 710 non-resource plan amendment zone change. LUBA remanded that. That was appealed to the Court of Appeals. They affirmed with opinion. So in any event, that's where that project stands.
If it goes to the Court of Appeals, then the state would be the appellant, or LUBA would be you got to have opposing parties if it's litigated, right? How does that
That's
work?
a great question. No, when LUBA renders their decision, whoever's not happy with it, and sometimes it's both sides, can appeal it further to the Court of Appeals.
Okay,
So those are the parties.
LUBA and.
No, not LUBA. LUBA, their decision, it's like a lower court decision.
Okay.
You know, their decision is whatever it is. And if people aren't, if the applicant or the other parties that were involved, in opposing the application.
Or who?
Oh, okay. So for 710 properties, well,
This is Thornburg, so
Oh,
you have the
for
tribes.
Thornburg, yeah, Thornburg, yeah, it was the tribes, Land Watch, Nunsey Gould,
Paul Lipscomb
Paul Lipscomb,
and Bishop.
and Bishop, yeah.
Okay, okay, that answers that.
Okay, great,
Yep,
great,
thanks.
great.
Yep.
And I could tell you all about 710 also. But it's 9:20.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Interesting development.
yeah.
That's it for me. Thank you.
Well-
Just so you all know, I did prepare a memo to the Board of County Commissioners, and if you want a copy of what I prepared, just let.
Then we can, we'll just, if you're interested, we'll
yeah, yeah.
just forward both
Yeah,
to
yeah.
you for your
Yeah.
reading
Yeah.
pleasure.
And I'll send that out tomorrow as part of your weekly What's Going On digest. And then I really appreciate you explored a new way of working collaboratively outside of motions. And I think it was really, really good. Like, I think that just the density, we did go for a long time, but I feel like just the density and the quality of the discussion was really valuable. And I liked it a lot. And I hope you did too.
Thank you. Commissioner Cyrus, any input this evening before you go back to that beach?
No, I thought things went well tonight. Nice job, and appreciate everybody, all the input and the amount of work that went into the presentations. And you guys have fun in the snow.
And why don't you shoot us a picture of the beach?
I could do that. It's
Oh.
it's actually
All right,
been in
thank
the
you.
upper 70s.
Nice, nice. Commissioner Hovkamp.
I'll just add that, again, really substantive meeting, well done, Chair. I do like the kind of new flavor to our discussions, and, it may have its own inefficiencies, but in my view, there's no way we would have gone through that much with motions and amendments and backing back out of them, and in my view. So I think it's great. It'll get better. Yeah.
Absolutely. And I think there's always a place for motions, as we did have some tonight. So
I think
think
it
it worked
primary
out.
offender with the motions, actually.
Oh, that's okay.
Yeah.
Commissioner Altman.
Really good meeting. Thank you. I like the way you ran the meeting. I just want to say thank you to everybody for considering the questions that I had posed in Tanya's portion of the meeting. I wasn't wedded to an outcome, but I would have hated to have moved something along and said, oh, I wish we had talked about X, Y, or Z. So I just appreciate everyone being willing to take the time to do that. Thanks to staff as always.
Commissioner Kelly.
No, thank you, staff, for meeting me, for answering our questions here and outside this meeting. So I really appreciate you guys are just such a wealth of knowledge. And I'm, a sponge. We're trying to be. No, and thank you, colleagues. I thought that was, great discussions. I value all your opinions and viewpoints, and I'm learning a lot, and I'm grateful to be part of it.
Thank you. As always, staff, thank you so much. You are a wealth of knowledge and really make it a lot easier to make our decisions. And I would say every deliberation we do is going to be a little different, be it the method of the RVs or the matrix, or even how we address either one, all motions, no motions, some motions. So thank you for the opportunity to allow me to try this method tonight. I think it went really well, and I agree we might not have gotten through everything if we had tongue-tied ourselves with motions all night long. All righty. At 9:22, we shall adjourn the meeting.